There we go. We're on. Let's.
I'm going to
Yeah.
push the
So,
little
so,
belly
so
button.
she had all her laundry hanging in the background.
Yeah, yeah. And I said, look, you sure you don't want to take down your laundry behind you? And she sort of did this. She went, oh my God, and sort of covered it up. It was really, really funny because people don't realize that, and this is a news thing that would have gone out to the whole of the UK and probably the whole of the world. I can't remember what the story was now, but so she quickly gathered up her belongings, a damp bra and panties and tights or whatever, and sort of rushed them off, and we had a good shot after that. So, but as you can see, I've only got a few pictures, and the other prisoner show. Look,
Oh, the other one.
Patrick
There we go.
Dillon. There he is. Yeah, yeah, there he is. There.
That,
So, yeah,
that's why
that's
it had
not
to be
busy.
called. That's why it had to be called Cell Block H over there, isn't it?
That's exactly
That's
it. That is
right.
not Sheila Florence. That that is not definitely not.
Yeah. Actually, going back to that Zoom that you were talking about, I think it was during COVID was really interesting with all the Zoom meetings. I don't know if you remember the guy in America, the lawyer that was in a case on Zoom. So he was representing a client, and the judge was on the Zoom call, and he had a cat emoji for his head.
Oh, that's right. And he
I
couldn't turn it off.
Yeah, I interviewed him during COVID and spoke
Oh,
about it.
really?
It was absolutely hilarious.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty good, isn't it? And there's obviously the famous Zoom call between a particular council. I think it's in the south of England somewhere, where they had a huge argument, and it all got recorded, and somebody leaked it to the internet, and it was just hilarious what these people were doing. So let's hope, Matt, that we maintain a level of decorum
Yeah, we're
here
good.
on,
We are
on
good.
today's prisoner cell block H interview.
Yeah.
Let's hope that we don't get, too fraught or angry with each other. A Donald Trump Zelensky kind of situation develops. Let's hope
How
that we
crazy was that? How
maintain
crazy was that interview? I mean, that
mad, mad. I mean, I work in television news, and I've never seen anything like that. And it speaks volumes for what type of person Trump is. He's a bully. He fits the absolute description of a playground bully, sees somebody weaker than himself, thinks they can get the better of him, and of course, all the while pandering to the real bully who's in Russia. And absolutely disgraceful. And the good thing is, I'm very proud, we have our prime minister, a proper prime minister now in Keir Starmer, Sir Keir, who took that on. And then obviously 2 days later, there's Zelensky meeting King Charles. There's a welcome there. The French president Macron comes in. And
yeah,
this is the thing, and this is how you actually win these kind of things. I mean, you can listen to Trump go like this and make up nonsense. And that what the best thing is just to push it to one side and look and deal with it yourself. And I'm really proud that Britain and France and most of the rest of the world, including Australia, obviously, have stood up to this nonsense. I mean, what an idiot. So anyway,
so
yeah.
you work for the BBC. So that's your job now. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, well, I'll explain during the interview if you like how that sort of came about because I've
Yeah,
had a
we're on.
very yeah.
We can talk about it now. We're here.
Okay, well, look, do you want to welcome me or do you want to
I
do
will,
something like
because
that?
we
Intro me?
we've
Yeah, I'll try and
started.
sit and make out that I'm surprised by what you're saying.
So,
All right.
yeah, welcome to Talking Prisoner, episode 69. Sorry, 68. Episode 68. Here we go. With
Good at 69, wouldn't it?
yeah,
Perfect number. What
episode
sort of
68
podcast is this? That's what I want to know.
with I'm joined by Jeff Smart live from the UK, who's stayed up late for me. I'm up early Sunday morning. He's up late. And yeah, so honored to have you on. And I'm like a kid in a candy store with behind the scenes stuff. I love behind the scenes information about
Sorry.
all
Yeah.
TV shows and movies. So I'm really looking forward to this, Jeff. Thanks for coming
Yeah,
on.
well, I hope I didn't disappoint you or your viewers here today. I mean, the reality was I actually worked the work I did on Prisoner wasn't my main job at the time, and I'll explain to you basically what I was doing and why I was there, if you like, just to give a bit of
Definitely.
historical context to this. Um, I was at college in the early 80s, like 81, 82. doing an art and design course at Caulfield Institute Technology. That's Chisholm, I think it became,
Awesome.
in Caulfield. And what happened is that I had done some work experience work in the Channel 10 art department because my art teacher at school, in high school, Aspendale Technical School, by the way, for anybody who's interested, it's no longer there. I think somebody burnt it to the ground after we left. It's no longer there. And what happened, my art teacher was a lady called Anita Ross. And Anita was lovely. She was shock of red hair, really with it kind of person. Well, she also had a very with it husband in a guy called Bradley Ross. And Brad Ross was head of the art department at Channel 10. So he basically ran that department. Now, what happened is that I did a couple of weeks work experience when I was about 15. And I had really studied up on doing television work. It was a career that I wanted to pursue. I wasn't quite sure what area of television, but, I used to collect all the magazines and all the things about how cameras worked and how you put a camera in behind a set. And I really, like you with your interest in Prisoner, this was my interest growing up, one of many, in television production. So what happened is that I went in there as a work experience student and they said, oh, design up a set. And I designed this set and they look at it and they go, well, why have you done that bit there? And I say, well, that's so you can get a camera in to get a reverse angle and stuff like that. And they're like, what? This guy understands about 3 camera shoots and stuff like that, which, to be honest, I didn't. I was fudging it a little bit, but if you can, I managed to convince them I knew what I was doing. So what happened is that I then, finished up Aspendale Technical School. I went on to do an art and design course, and then I was at college for a couple of years. And then out of the blue one day, about halfway through my course, I got a telephone call from Brad Ross to say, oh, hi, Jeff, it's Brad Ross over here at Channel 10, fresh from the success of Holiday Island, I might add.
I've heard some stories about that show.
Yeah, that was in about 1980, 81, I think. But no, this was about 1983, I think it was, 82, 83. I'm not unsure, I think it was 83. And basically what happened is that he said, look, were you interested in a job's come up in the art department? Would you be interested? We're really impressed by what you did when you came and did work experience 3 or 4 years ago. And, how would you feel about, are you interested in the job? I said, well, yeah, I would be. This is a good stepping stone. How do I apply for the job? And he said to me, turn up Monday, the job's yours.
Oh,
and that was it.
Like that.
So now I better qualify this certainly, because obviously we're talking about Prisoner here. I was employed by Channel 10, right? I wasn't employed by Grundy's. Yeah. Now, what that means is that I worked on a variety of shows of output that we did at Channel 10.
Okay.
So I wasn't specific to a show, although most of my work ended up being done for Young Talent Time, right? Because Young Talent Time was done in Studio A, the big one, and Prisoner was being done in, I think, Studio B. It's slightly smaller at the other end, right? So to sort of describe this, what happened is that there are 2 big studios, the one Young Talent Time's in and the Prisoner one, which is a permanent standing set. It wasn't struck and then something else went in there on a Thursday. It was there the whole time. Otherwise, they'd never made the shows because they were doing, when I was there, 2 episodes a week. It was madness. And then in between that, the art department was sort of almost next door to Studio B. And you come out of the art department. It was like a little building within a building, like a little hut. Like, those temporary school room things. It was a bit like one of those. Yeah, inside the loading bay where the set area is. And then next to that was the what we had as a news studio, which had, they used to do eyewitness news out of there. And then there was another small studio, which was where they do things like, Marty the Monster kind of thing on Saturday morning, right? So the art department was sort of nestled in between these other studios. And in a way, inevitably, it meant that you got dragged into other things, even though it may not have been your sole job to do those things. And I think the way it worked during Prisoner was that I was employed by Channel 10. I think the camera people were employed by Channel 10. I think there were staff and so on. But the people who were doing like the writing and I think the producers were all Grundy people. So I think that there was a couple of designers. There was one designer on it. I think I've heard Ian Costello was the original designer for the Prisoner show. Yeah, I think he was a Grundy's person, as I remember. Okay. I didn't see him because by the time I joined, they were up to about probably about episode 270, something like that. So in a way, from an art department perspective, there wasn't actually much ongoing work that needed to be done. The sets had been built 3-4 years before, designed and built, and they were modular, so you could take a wall out and put another wall in and put, 1 minute it's the dining area and the next minute it's something else. Yep. So really it became a staging thing for the staging guys and prop dressers. So most of my work was dealing with, young talent time would come along and they'd say, oh, we need a dinosaur costume for next week's show for one of the kids. So you'd make up this dinosaur costume, or we need a cutout thing that looks like, a wheel of a sailing ship or something. So
would you actually make it, or do you drew the?
No, well, I would. I mean, for a dinosaur costume, I'd make that, right? Oh, wow, okay. Because the thing is, Channel 10, unlike say ABC Television that I eventually went to work for, they don't have big departments. So, their wardrobe department is a woman that goes out and buys the clothes over at the nearest, shopping town kind of thing. They don't have their own seamstresses. They don't have people like that. They buy in stuff or they buy in freelancers. Whereas, say, at ABC, where I eventually ended up working for a while, they had a full wardrobe department. They had tailors at ABC Television, tailoring suits for Andrew Denton. I mean, work that out. Whereas at Channel 10, they had the job lot of dungarees and other costumes for Prisoner. And I think they had somebody who could, sew a label on or a pocket or something like that. But they didn't actually make the costumes there as such. They were a costume supplier, not a maker. So, for instance, if you're familiar with television and the way it works, basically you have somebody like, say, was it Jeff Hatton? I think Jeff, somebody, yeah, who I think was doing stuff at the time when I was there, maybe. And the idea is what would happen, typical television thing, maybe they've got a new location to go to, maybe it's only a house which they can shoot exterior shots, but they want to do the studio shots. So they might occasionally have a new set that needs to be made. So a designer will design them up, and designing sets is very straightforward because all the flats are a specific size. So you work out the run that way and the run that way and where the door is and, whether it's a lounge room or a kitchen or whatever. And you design that, and then you draw up plans on paper, and then those plans are given to set construction after they've been approved. Set construction build the set, and then once it's built, the painters paint it or whatever. It's then taken in the studio, it's set up, it's lit, it's dressed, and you're ready to go. And that's the way that process works from a designer's perspective. Yep. Now, I was like, I don't know what I was actually called in my designation. I'm not quite sure. Dog's body, I think, is probably, but I was the youngest one there. And I was very excited because it was my first job in television. And, working on something like Young Talent Time, where we make things during the week or get stuff prepped. And then on a Saturday during the day, we pre-record the show that went out that evening. So we pre-recorded about 2 hours before it went out to air. Yep. And it was kids and stuff. So you had to be a bit careful. You couldn't do a live show. Otherwise, if one of the kids, panicked on stage, that would go out to the whole nation. So we recorded it what they call as live. Now, that's quite different to the way that Prisoner was done. And I'm sure you've spoken to other production people about this, but that is basically a standing set where I think they used to shoot 3 days a week on set, and they used to then go out on location. It was the early days of the technology involved in doing this. And I think even if you went out on location, I think they used to take an OB van out.
Yeah.
So they could vision mix it inside the van. So they had cables. So if you're on location at a house, you know, there's a siege or something, they had the cameras set up. They all had cables running to the van. You had a vision mixer in the van. They're normally used for sporting events. But at the time, I mean, there were more portable cameras where you could record things to, you know, a recording device on them or a tape. But they were mainly used by news gathering. And it takes a lot longer to shoot single camera because you have to shoot this shot, then you have to shoot the reverse shot, you have to shoot the wide shot. Whereas if you've got 3 cameras there, all you're doing is switching from one camera to another.
Yeah.
So it's a much quicker process, which is why I think they used the OB van. And of course, oddly, that OB van used to drive up and out the gate, which had Wentworth Detention Centre at the top of it, which is, you know, when I used to go in the morning. Have you been round at Channel 10 or have you had a look round?
I've had a look from the outside, and I did go there when I was a kid to a.
Oh, right.
What was the show? Don't Forget Your Toothbrush, it was called. I was in the audience as a kid,
right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
a few memories of it.
Well, if you go to Channel 10, you can go into the entrance, which is where security is, which takes you into the inner sort of area, where we used to have a helicopter. There was a helicopter pad right out the front, because that's how the news crews used to get to big stories from Nunawading.
They used that chopper for an escape in Prisoner with the Eyewitness News logo on it.
Oh, really? Oh, there you go. Yeah. But funnily enough, Brad Ross told me one day that he could actually, he was a chopper pilot. He had a license to fly a helicopter. And I'm like, what? You know, and I'll tell you the one thing I just want to mention about Brad Ross. He was the coolest guy I ever met. He used to wear cowboy boots and stuff like that. Yeah, he was the coolest designer. He sort of had this, you know, he was sort of, I don't know, in his late 30s, early 40s or something. But he used to be the. I thought when I grow up, I want to be him, you know, kind of thing.
So did you end up buying some cowboy boots, or?
No, I didn't actually. But well, not that I'm prepared to tell anybody about anyway. Yeah, I mean, so what happened? I was in that art department for about a year, and we used to do all sorts of bits of stuff. And somebody I used to do some work with occasionally was a guy called Noel Parker. And Noel, you might see him on the occasional credit. I don't think I ever gave a credit on Prisoner because I was doing little bits and pieces, right? But Noel was somebody who was part of their staging crew, but also occasionally would do little special effectsy things. So they wanted to fog up a set. There was a fire. He put a flame bar up. They'd have. I remember me and him once. You say you've never been into Channel 10 since you were younger, right? Okay, here's a little tip, which I'm not saying anybody out there should be doing this, but one of the jobs we did, we had to make some sections of barbed wire up, right? And the way we did it is you get some wire, some fencing wire, and you put it in a drill bit, like an electric drill. And the other end you put in a clamp or a vise. And I remember me and Noel standing there going, mee, and winding this thing up so you get the actual thing. We did about, I don't know, 6 or 8 of these things. And then what you do is you tie little elastic bands this thing along, right? And you cut the elastic bands so it would sort of stick out, and you'd spray it silver. And from a distance, it looked like barbed wire, right? But you could touch it and it wouldn't cut you. Yep. And that was then taken away by the staging crew, so they could put a section of fence up, replace the real barbed wire with the fake barbed wire, the prop barbed wire, right? Now, as I remember it, I could be wrong, I don't remember them ever taking it down. So there is a chance that a section of the Channel 10 perimeter fence where you can see barbed wire it's actually rubber bands tied to it. And now I'm not saying that that's a point of entry, that if you're there at 3 a.m.,
everyone's going to go and jump over that fence now.
Well, I don't remember whereabouts it was, but I remember there was always an escape attempt at some point during the course of a month, you know. So they said, well, if we replace a little section, and I never saw it. We made this stuff up, we gave it to them, and it's for them to do whatever they want with it, you know. Yeah. But if anybody is, as I say, wants to get into the studio and go around and find the bit of the fence where the barbed wire isn't real, it might still be there. Who knows? But yeah, sorry.
Someone will try that.
Well, yeah, don't. But I didn't say any of this. Right? And we did little silly things, like somebody would come in and they'd say, "Oh, we need a sign that says danger high voltage on it," right? Because somebody's realised they need to put a sign up because, you know, something or other. So they come into the art department and we'd say, right, what colour? Right, okay, we'll make it like this with the stripes on it, you know, yellow stripes, yellow and black stripes, and put danger thing on it and stuff. And these were the days of Letraset and little, you might trace out a pattern on a template or something and whatever. And so you mount it to something, put some double-sided tape on it, give it to them, and then, you know, they disappear. You never see it again. So there was a lot of things like that. But of course, the interesting thing was, I remember being there when that loading bay I mentioned, the area where the thing went up. I mean, I used to come into work. I've mentioned this before. You'd go in the front area where the guards are, but towards the left-hand side, there's a little angled road, and it takes you to the car park. Now, that's for staff and visitors, right? And then from there, there's 2 security gates. One, you have to walk up to the security gates and say, I've come to see such and such, and they give you a pass and let you in. But there was another revolving gate thing where as long as you had your pass, it would click you in. And then what you would do is you would go into that main brown red brick building. You go past what was Studio A, the big one, and then you'd walk another 100 yards or 50 yards, and you get to where the art department was on your left, on your right rather. And then, but if you walked another 20, 30 yards, you get to the front of where the Studio B was, which is the permanent prisoner set. And then, of course, if you kept walking, you'd open the door, and where that door opened is where you would normally see, you'd look up and the sign saying Wentworth Detention Centre. And that's next to the red brick building with all the fake boxes for the windows. And
coincidentally, that sign that was above the loading bay is actually over in the UK. There was
is it?
Yeah, a fan actually reached out to me and sent me photos of it. He's got it put up in his bed.
Yeah. In his bedroom. Whereabouts in the UK? You know?
I'm not sure.
I'm up sort of in the north of England, but
find out for you. Yeah, he sent it. Some of the fans have got some memorabilia, and they send me things every few days and all this different information.
Really? How bizarre if you'd end up in Britain. That's bizarre. I mean, look, that area, let me explain something with that area there. On the right-hand side, as you look at that, so you're looking back and you can see the Wentworth detention sign, and there's the garage door. And of course, this went down because it was a loading bay. So the garage door is a bit lower than the where you walk in, right? But on the right-hand side is actually the broadcast transmitter, right? So the whole side of that has a completely fake red brick wall made of wood going around it.
Okay.
So that, because it looks a bit odd, doesn't it? I mean, there's very few prisons with their own broadcasting transmitter. You know, that wouldn't be commonplace. Also, isn't it a way for, you know, prisons to climate and escape and things like that? So that was covered up, and then obviously on the other side they put all those ridiculous windows, right?
Which still there now.
Yes, so I believe somebody showed me a picture. The ones higher up, I think, are still there. The lower ones, I think, gone. Oh, yeah. But this actually brings me to an issue.
Another fan's got one of the boxes. He sent me a photo of it.
Really? That's, what do you do with that? I mean, what do you do? Hang it on the wall? I suppose you could, couldn't you? I mean, that's what they did with the originals. They just hung them on the wall. And I remember that, it's my first job. And for the first few weeks, I'm trying to show my worth, and do things and stuff. And I remember having a chat with Brad Ross about those windows at the back. I said, who made those? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, those windows. And he said, oh, they were made early on, and they're so you could get a shot and the windows be lit up. I said, yeah, but they look absolutely terrible. I mean, this is the work, like the guy did work experience 3 years before. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, the windows go in, they don't go out. His idea was that. And he said, oh, it was just the only way we could do it at the time. It wasn't really clear why it was done. I mean, it wasn't Brad that did that. It was whoever designed them initially.
Well, it was at the start, because Ian Bradley was telling me about that, those windows. So when they very first shot Prisoner, it was only originally 13 episodes. They didn't know.
That's right. Yeah,
how long it was going to go on.
Yeah, it was a temporary solution, and actually that reminds me about the sets, and I'll explain to you why. Because often people have talked about the wobbly sets, and there's a reason why they're wobbly, and I'll explain in a moment. And it's partly because of the short original. It was only going to be a certain amount of episodes, but what happened is that these boxes, they were about this deep, and there were bigger ones at the bottom that were about this big, and they were literally like bolted onto the wall, right? And as they went up, they got smaller because somebody said, oh, well, that's perspective. But here's the problem. Yes, actually, things do get smaller the further away, but they also get closer together. And if you look at that wall, you've got 5 or 6 big windows. Then it goes up and up and up. But the windows get smaller, but the gaps become bigger between them. And that makes no sense whatsoever. And I said, why don't you just make them all medium-sized? Because they're supposed to be prison cells. They're not for prisoners to look out and look at the garden. They're literally to let a bit of light in, It seemed a ridiculous idea. So at one point, I remember that I, trying to prove my worth, I guess, without realizing the financial or visual implications, I came up with this idea where you could make a window frame that was about 1 inch thick, right? And within that window frame is a stuff called front projection material, right? And it's a bit like the material they use on road signs. So when you shine a light on it, they brighten up, right? And the idea was we would put these half dowels, so like D-shaped, if you look down them. So the round bit would be at the front, literally right in front of this. And you could put them on the walls. And if you get back with the camera, you can have a light right next to the camera shine, and you get the effect of it lit up. Yeah. You can even project into these areas, particularly at night, the interior of a cell. So you could get a shot of Wentworth Detention Centre with a cell inside. You could actually see 2 people standing there, or something like that, or a bed sheet being torn up, or something like that, for an escape attempt. You could see it. And I wrote this down. I said, I've got this great idea, how we do this. And of course it was like, oh, we haven't got time for that. We haven't got the money. And of course, by then, 280 or 90 episodes had gone. I mean, it would look odd to suddenly change it.
Yeah.
So I was really disappointed about that, as I was with the way the set was constructed and the way it was put up, because you mentioned there about 14 episodes or 20 or whatever it was to start with, and this is well before my time. Obviously, for 14 episodes, you have to spread the cost of that set across only 14 episodes, so it's very cheap. So when that set was first built, it was built quite, not as a permanent set. It was built as something you could lift up and take out after production had gone. Nobody expected we'd go on for, well, what is it, 6 years or whatever it was, right? Yeah, something like 7, whatever. So nobody expected it would go on for that length of time. But the problem with the set, and this is something you'll notice on other shows. So, for instance, a set is normally built 3-wall, right? And it means that you can brace the back of the wall, and you either do that with a wooden brace or you do it with sandbags or metal weights, or you can actually even attach like a scaffold to the back of it, right? So it holds it nice and rigid. The problem with the prisoner set is that because you had corridors that led into cells, and I think it was like L or C shaped, the corridor or something like that went around, with like 4 or 6 areas in the middle, which could be cells or could be, an office or something like that. And then I think there was some running along the other side as well. But the problem with that is that when you build it, if you have a set where you've got a corridor and then a cell or a room to go into, the wall is this thick, right? But of course, it's an outer wall of plywood with timber inside and another outer wall with plywood this far apart. Well, how do you brace it? Because you can't brace it this side because you won't get your corridor shut. You can't brace it the other. So the problem is that, it was originally a temporary set where perhaps if you made them, if the set wobbled, you could say, right, wind the tape back. We're going to shoot that bit. But of course, if you're doing 2 episodes a week, you probably say, we'll live with it. Secondly, it was quite a difficult technical process. You had to run the tape back and then let it pick up speed and get the floor manager to cue it and to pick it up again. So, so the problem with the sets, and you see this in other shows, I mean, in 40 Towers, for instance, the series 40 Towers? Well, good. I'm glad you do. Quality comedy. If you look at the foyer area where the desk is, and there's another room, which is the restaurant area, the amount of times they push through those double doors and the set wobbles. Yeah. Why? Because again, you've got nowhere to brace it. Yeah. And they actually, if you notice, there's a couple of return things on the set which help to stabilize it a bit. But where the door is, you get like Manuel pushing through there. I mean, it's a bit manic anyway. And you'll see the set wobble a bit, or a banister, because they're hard things to brace. So the problem with that set was not only did it wobble a bit, because it had been built to match the exterior of the building, the dark red, meant that it's incredibly difficult to light. Because if you have, say, a room with light-colored wallpaper, you put light in, the light gets bounced around. If you have dark red bricks, you put light on them, it still looks dark and dingy, So there were various problems. I mean, the shots where they used to come down the staircase was the staircase going upstairs, and I think it was the one that led to the upper floor, which is where we had that would be where the control gallery is upstairs. And I think they may have had some maybe makeup or something up there. I'm not quite sure. It's so long ago. I remember that we had a wardrobe and makeup rooms, which were, I think, near Studio A. And I think for Prisoner, they had like a little mini thing because there was such a quick schedule. It was like, right, take your hat off, put this hat on, off you go. So it's a bit like that. But look,
just for a second, just go back a minute off Prisoner for a second. You mentioned Faulty Towers, and I think the UK produced the best comedy shows ever in the world. But going to Are You Being Served, I interviewed Mike Berry, who played Mr. Spooner on Are You Being Served a couple of years ago. So he's the only surviving cast member left of that show now. Yep. And of
course, they did an Aussie version.
Yeah, they did, which I didn't see. But he was telling me about, you remember the lift on Are You Being Served?
Yeah.
He said it was one of the most problematic things on the show. It couldn't get to work. The doors would shut. And it was an absolute nightmare, the actual set.
Well, let me tell you something. When they made the Australian version,
did you watch that? I never saw it.
No, I did. And the reason why is because I was there for one of the recording sessions. Because when I think it was made in about 1981, and Brad Ross was the designer on the show.
Oh, really?
Right. So my mate, who became my boss, was actually the designer of that. And Are You Being Served Down Under? And there's that they basically, with the exception of John Inman, they replaced the entire cast with basically body doubles, right? Who was it? It was the opera singer was the Mrs. Slocum character, and Yeah, it was fascinating. And the reason why was this is what I was told. Originally, they wanted to bring the entire cast of the British show over to Australia and make the show in Australia, right?
Yeah, right. What?
But Equity, June Bronhill, that's her name, isn't it? Bronhill?
Yeah,
June
June
Bronhill?
Bronhill. They had
Yeah.
Christina
They,
Moore,
they,
Miss Nichols, Christina Moore, who was also in Prisoner. They
yes,
had
yes.
Shane Bourne, Reg Evans,
Jane
Richard
Bourne.
Collingwood.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, what happened is the
Murray
reason they.
Fields. Actually, Murray Fields was also
Oh,
in.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, I think it was only like 6 or 8 or 10 episodes or something. But the bizarre thing is, it's like a parallel universe, right? The woman is saying, my pussy has, been playing up all night and all that stuff, and it's a different woman with the same kind of hair as, Molly Sugden.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason why this happened was because the original idea was to bring over the whole cast. Then they realized that Grace Brothers was a real store in Sydney. So they had to change the name of the store to Bone Brothers, right? Because they couldn't use the Grace Brothers thing. I mean, how bizarre that you happen to have Grace Brothers? I mean, how bizarre is it? You happen to have So anyway, what happened is Actors Equity said, you can't bring over 7, I think probably they said pommy actors, right? But we'll let you have 1. But the rest of the cast, you'll have to flesh out with Australian actors. Well, of course, by then, I think the first episode was using heavily from a British script, and the other episodes all used those characters that were written with Mrs. Slocum and Miss Brahms in mind, right? So they were stuck. How do you make a show which has got an ensemble cast, where you can't get the ensemble cast, right? So what they did is they brought over John Inman, because obviously he was the most outlandish and probably, the most popular. And they said, well, we'll find actresses and actors that just look like they're British counterparts, drop them in and give them the same lines, and jobs are done, So it's this really weird, and I've shown it to people in Britain, and they go, what the hell is this kind of thing? It's just the most bizarre thing. But Brad Ross was the designer on that, and built a little robot machine. And I remember that I was there and we were sticking dials on. I wasn't working there at that time. I think I was just had an interest in something, and he sort of, we did some stuff there. But
isn't it amazing that that show was only got onto air because of a tragedy? Was the when the Olympics were on and they were kidnapped. Some of the athletes were kidnapped.
Oh yeah, Munich. Yeah, 1972.
So they actually shot an episode of Are You Being Served, and then the BBC said, "No, this is all. We forget about it." So they just put it on the shelf. And then when the Olympics, when the tragedy happened, they had all these slots to fill because they broadcast it, and they go, "Oh, put that show on." I mean, that was it. It just
to cheer everybody up, I suppose. I mean, look, I actually work for BBC these days. I work in the news department, and I edit news stories. I cut the news stories up, and no doubt, even in Australia, you'll seen one of my edits at some point about something that's happened in Britain or something's happened in Europe or whatever, or an international kind of story. My mum, who lives in Australia, still said to me, I saw your thing on the telly last night, this kind of thing, that I told her about, and then she saw it in Australia on, on one of the channels there. But it was quite an interesting thing because, as I say, working at Channel 10, I mean, it was an interesting thing for me to get involved at that level that early. And literally the first paying job I did was working, full-time job. I think I was doing freelance work a little bit as well, was on Channel 10. And, as I say, I can remember, Danny Minogue being there and, all the other cast members of the show, they were about this high, they were like 11 years old or whatever. It was a well-known show, and alongside Prisoner as well, to work on those two shows is quite a sort of an interesting start in the Australian TV industry. And I mean, a year later, after I started, they realized that they didn't have enough budget to keep me on. But of course, by then I'd had a year's worth of experience working in television, on two quite well-known shows. Well, I said, yeah, my work day during the course of a week, I do one or two little minor things for Prisoner, little things, but most of my stuff was for the kid, the Young Time show, because every week they needed something different. Yep. By the time I came on board, all the sets for that had been built. Actually, Grundy's handled most of that kind of stuff anyway. We weren't that much involved, but we get dragged into little things, and I'll show you one of the things we did get dragged into. I'm going to show you this. You see that?
ID badges.
ID badges. Now, that is a copy of an original I had. It was on a damaged piece of paper, and I've repaired it slightly. But I remember going in one day. When I joined, I think they just brought in these ID badges. This is about 83. Prior to that, there were different costumes. I don't think they had ID badges. But what happened, you can see, if I look close enough there, it's a really badly made logo, right? I mean, it's a bit lopsided. You can actually see that this side is higher at the bottom than that side, right? And it's Wentworth Detention Centre. And apparently the little logo at the top there, I was told it's supposed to be like a government crest, like with the kangaroo, but they couldn't copy it because it'd be illegal to do so. So they had to make this blobby kind of little thing like that. Well, what happened? There were a few of these, and of course, all hand drawn. And I think that bit was taken from some letterheads that had been printed up for the show. So that, on Meg's desk or on Erica's desk, you'd see that kind of stuff. So somebody, before I came along, cut that out and made this thing up. Well, these bloody ID cards became a nightmare, right? Because...
Really?
Eh?
They were a nightmare.
They were a nightmare, and I'll tell you the reason why. So some of these were originally made up, and of course they're in like a plastic kind of wallet thing, an ID badge with a lanyard. So, and this was all done before I joined, but I was stuck after that with the consequences of that decision of having these badges. So what happened is that on the first, you'd have somebody like, say, Joan Ferguson or something like that, the Freak or, whatever. And they had photos taken with them on a normal camera. And what would happen is somebody would frame it up so they'd be on one side so that they could cut the corner of the picture, because the picture would be about, say, that big. And they'd stand back and just get a little frame shot of her, Maggie Kirkpatrick, or whatever her name was. And they'd take a picture, and they'd take a picture of the cast, take them into a chemist shop. This was the time where you could get an hour processing or 4 hours.
Yeah, the hour processing. Yeah, you paid extra.
You just come in, right? So they go up to the shopping centre, get these, and then somebody would cut it out. And you can see on some of the badges, on the photos, that one edge has got a curve on it. And the reason why is when the prints used to come back, there was this thing about, instead of having sharp corners, they used to make them round. Oh. And you can see which part of the picture the photo's been taken on based upon where the little curved edge is. Do you see what I mean by saying that? So they used to cut a little bit out. Well, that was initially how they did it. Then what happened is new people would come in to do a couple of weeks on Prisoner. One of the main cast is sick or she's on holiday, so they brought in somebody to replace her for a month. So you have to make her a new ID badge. Okay, so how do you do that? Now, I remember the continuity people had a Polaroid camera. You click it and the picture would come out. Because the continuity, they used to shoot out a sequence, and it was like...
Can you believe they've made a comeback, those cameras?
Yes, I believe. So they had one of those. So we thought, I know, when the next actress or actor comes in, we'll just use that and cut that out. The problem is that when you cut those things, they've got like a membrane inside, which has got chemicals. And if you cut it, it's gooey and horrible stuff, toxic. And it was like, how are we going to do this, So eventually what happened is that sometimes if an actress or a performer was hired to come in and do the show, somebody would get them, stage assistant or something, up to the local shopping centre where there was an ID booth, passport booth. And they get their pictures there, and it would come back and it would look something like this, right? Something like that, yeah? Now, that's I mean, it's not really in focus there, but that's the type of thing. So we'd cut one of those pictures out, and we had bits of cardboard. I've got some other ones printed here. I was guest at a prisoner event in Birmingham about November last year. And I had some of these printed, and we gave them out to the people that were in the audience, and they were very thrilled. These are actual little card copies. So what you do is you cut out the picture, place it there, and then we had a little laminating machine, and it was and you go ka-chunk like that, and it would seal it in, and then a lanyard we'd put on, and they've got their card. But here's the problem. There were so many people coming in every week that how do you get all these badges done? And everywhere looks a bit different. So what we ended up working out was that, bear in mind, it was a 4x3 television screen. Biggest TV in those days was probably about that big, right? It was standard definition. So you could get away with a lot because these badges were only seen, at a distance. You didn't see any details on them. Yeah. So what happened is that person who got their ID done would come back and they'd have 3 pictures left over. So after a while, we had a bunch of these things lying around with 3 pictures on. So what we used to do is we used to cut them out and say if this person here had, say, like shorter hair, well, we'd paint out with a brush and stick that in. And I mean, we were doing things like drawing glasses on them. We put I remember doing one with a moustache. One of the guys, obviously, not one of the women, even though some of them, I don't know. But so because it was so small, you could get away with it. So we could get, and I think some of the pictures were actually people in the art department that we'd taken pictures of. And you can tell which ones. Here's the key to all you prisoner fans, if you're looking at the picture. If you see one of these with a black and white picture, that's from the photo booth because it was a black and white photo booth, right? If they're in color, they're likely to be taken with a normal camera with an hour processing, right? And the giveaway is that one of the corners is usually rounded, right? So that's one other giveaway. And if somebody looks like a cross between sort of, a hybrid, like a photo fit, an old police photo fit, that's the one where we coloured them in ourselves and stuck them in and nobody noticed. So don't tell anybody, right? The secret of television. Yeah, that's how we used to do them. Yeah, absolutely. What fun and games, God almighty. Those badges, though, and it was like, oh, not the badges again. Like, I mean, because when you think about it, nobody had considered that everybody coming in that was new that would play either a visitor. Oh, I think the visitor ones were different. I think they had visitor on them, and then I think those. But what an absolute nightmare. So, but these are the. I mean, it's funny. Technically, they weren't the old days of television. I mean, in 1980s, we had color and we had this and we had that. But compared to what we've got now,
difference,
the post-production process was completely different. I mean, in those days, if you had a piece of videotape, 1-inch videotape, and you did what's called an assembly edit, so you get so if you had some location shots and you had some shots of the studio, and they were all out of order, that'd be given to the editor, the online guy. And he would select it and he would drop it in, and you do a tape pre-roll and it would drop in that next sequence, right? Then it would roll it back, cue it up, do the next. But if you suddenly decided, oh, I don't like that, that's the wrong take of the first shot, you couldn't just drop it in like you can now. I mean, I do edits for the news where the rushes come in and I've got 45 minutes to cut a 3-minute piece together. Boom, 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 boom. I mean, it's not always that bad, but it can be, No, if you did that, you had to go right back to the start and reconform every cut right from that point where you needed to change it. And then you had another problem. If you say you did that edit and then you wanted to add some music to it and, afterwards, well, there are ways of doing that where you could put it on a different track. But If you then had to fundamentally change it again for some reason or another, if this was all analog and you were going down a quality level every time you did it, and even though it was, 1-inch videotape, the professional thing, if you got to about the fourth or fifth, you'd be seeing grain all over the place because it was analog. So to do a show like Prisoner, you would go from the material that was shot, you would do an assembly edit, and then from the assembly edit master, you would then make a duplicate master, right? Which is usually the one that would be broadcast, right? And you might make 10 duplicates from that master, so you can send one up to Sydney to be broadcast by 10 up there, one to Adelaide or whatever, and that's how they used to do it. Or although I think probably they were broadcasting it all out of Channel 10, but that's the way they did it. And then, of course, for overseas sales, they'd send out all these dupes. So already that master is 3 generations down, if you like.
So I think that's how, compared to now, I mean, they used to send the scripts from, to the head office and send them to the cast. And I mean, now you obviously
drop them in or post them to them or whatever,
or fax or.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. We used to get designs when I worked for ABC television. I mean, when I left Channel 10, luckily enough, I was offered a job as a props maker over ABC TV in Hyatt, which strangely from where I live is exactly 15 minutes, the exact opposite way. Yeah, so it was 15 minutes for me to get to Nunawading, and it was 15 minutes to get to this place. And I worked on shows like the D-Generation shows.
Oh, wow.
I did a podcast recently with them, actually. It's quite strange. I've done 2 in 2 weeks. So I've never done any before, and I'll probably do none after. But I worked on that. I worked on a thing called The Gillies Republic. I worked on a show called The Fast Lane, making props and doing special effectsy things.
I've got to say, for the ABC, I'm currently watching a show called The Newsreader, which it's been out
yes,
a couple of years. Exactly. I've just caught up with it now.
Yeah,
it's brilliant, like such an amazing show. But what I love about it is how realistic the sets are.
Well, I mean, you say realistic the sets are, it's possibly because they are on a real location. I mean, the idea of building, in the days of Prisoner, you built a set because you had control, you had 3 cameras, right? And you needed all that infrastructure. It was a hell of a difficult job to go out on location and keep the pace up, right? So shows were made like that then. Nowadays, of course, all the equipment's very portable. You've got lapel radio mics hidden away. You've got this, you've got that. And of course, all the equipment, you can have it on a steady kind of unit thing. So you can, it feels like it's on a pedestal camera. It's not, it's being handheld, but it's super smooth. Yeah. So you can go to places. And also, one of the other problems with the old cameras is that their ability to take the light coming through that lens, they had huge lenses at the front, was very limited because they're analog picture tubes. And they didn't work well in bad light. So you had to flood a lot of sets. That's why a lot of television, including a lot of British TV, if you look at a sitcom from the 70s, everything's bright. There's no dark corners. Prisoner was interesting in that they lit it with these shaft kind of lights. And sometimes you go into a cell and you think, they left the light off. It's like, it's pretty dark in there. No, it's just that, because of those red walls, it wouldn't light it up very naturally. But it's interesting over the years how this technology has changed. I mean, one thing I will point out, I mean, I worked for Channel 10 and Channel 7 at some point. I was working on Fast Forward for a short while with Brad Ross, who worked over there eventually. But the thing that made Nunawading unique, right, was simply this. The studio complex at Nunawading was set quite well out of the city, Nunawading, right? And it had a huge backlot area, right? And I think it was built about 1960. Now, if you look at all the other television studios in Melbourne at that time, ABC were at Ripponlea, but they couldn't expand.
Demolished, coincidentally.
Yes, so I heard, which is very sad. But the problem with it is it's next to the Ripponlea estate. So you can't expand. You can't say, oh, well, we'll build an extra few studios here. You can't do that, right? So we used to have like set design down the street, down in Elstonwick. We used to have another department there. Set construction was in Hyatt, which is 15 minutes drive up the road.
All over the place.
The P&N Highway. If you go down to where I think it's a KFC in Hyatt on the P&N Highway, next door to that is, I think, Office Works. Well, that used to be, before it was knocked down, the ABC building in Ripon Lake. Yeah. And I was based down there. But here's the thing. If you go to Channel 7 in Dorcas Street, it was just a collection of buildings and old sheds, right? If you went to Channel 9, that was in Bendigo Street in Richmond. And I think it was an old, I don't know, an old bakery or something building they took over.
I think it was I was there last week. It was really sad, actually, because they've kept the facade up and it's all apart.
Right.
But they've still got the original.
What is it?
GTV9 and everything, and I'm a nostalgia guy. Like, I hate seeing things demolished and everything like that. But I think it was a piano factory or something. It was something.
Yeah, it was something like that. It wasn't ever built as a TV station, right?
Yeah.
It was quite an old building. And the thing about Channel 10 is, it was the last of the stations that was built, and it was built specifically for television in mind. And they got it out of town. There's lots of space around it. And I think Reg Ansett owned it. I think he was the original Ostorama TV guy. And, you know, it was what happened around the time that Prisoner came in. That's when he sold up to Rupert Murdoch.
Correct.
And that was when it became the Channel O to Channel 10.
Yeah.
They changed that thing. And I was there, you know, the logo, which has got like the 1 and the 0 with a line through it, a gap.
Yeah.
I was there when it changed over.
Oh, wow.
To that logo. Yeah. Because it was Channel O up until about 1978, and then it became Channel 10. Then it became, or then it became the O10 network, and then it became Channel, yeah. And then it became Channel 10, and I was there when it had actually changed to 10. And it's not the same as the symbol now, the one with the TEN with the circle.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the actual blocked 10 thing. And the thing is, if you go down to that studio now, obviously most of that back lot is now houses. They sold off the adjacent land. But if you go up there, you'll notice that the roads are named after, like, I think there's an Ansett Drive or a Bombardier close. They're all aircraft related things, right? And that's the reason why, because it was Reg Ansett who bought the land and determined what the names should be. And as I say, one of the reasons I believe Prisoner came into existence was because Murdoch wanted to get a distinguishing thing for his TV network, Channel 10. And while it was called the Movie Channel, I think Channel 10, the top movies or movie, you know, they were trying to make it like that. And he was doing deals with big American distributors to get films. So you get the latest James Bond, which came out 3 years before, and on Channel 10 Sunday night movie. But I think at the same time, they realized that, you know, there were rules at the time about local content. And I think they wanted to establish some sort of strong local drama. And depending on, I mean, no doubt you've spoken to other people about how this came about. I wasn't privy to any of this. But I wanted to point out a show that has certain similarities, but a germ of an idea. And that's a show called Within These Walls.
Within These Walls, yeah.
Yeah, Googie Withers, made by London Weekend Television in London on the South Bank studios there. And if you look at the main character that's played by Googie Withers in the show, she's almost a carbon copy of what became Erica Davidson.
There's a lot of...
The hair is exact. I think they borrowed the same wig. It's basically Molly Sugden's wig.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of news about Googie Withers actually was look, some people say yes and some people say no. And I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it. But there was... Well, I wasn't... She was approached to play Erica Davidson originally, but she said no.
I'm not privy to that. I was some, started in the art department 3 years in. But one thing you have to realize, if you're selling a television show, you try and sell it based upon a lot of its merits, a unique selling point. And that selling point might have been, we've got Googie with us, right? She's playing a lead role. Now, even if you never intended to use Googie Withers, you might put that into your pitch, because she has an established base with a popular show in Britain. She's now back in Australia because she lived here. We're going to get her to play the role. Fantastic. Where do I sign on the dotted line? And then a week later, oh, she's not available to us. We're going to find somebody that looks just like her and sounds like her, right? I mean, these things happen in telly. You know, I mean, look at what happened with Are You Being Served? I mean, you know, the origins of how that came together as an Australian show is, I told you before. So I think probably there is an element of truth in it, but it might be on the basis of very early days where it was just an idea in somebody's head and they were trying to get some network interest. And that might be it. You know, we're making a film and we've got Mel Gibson. Oh, Christ, yeah, great. You know, and then you find
as amazing as Reg Grundy was. I mean, he did copy a lot of shows. Like
oh yeah, and he was Mr. Game Show, wasn't he?
I mean, he took all those shows from America that were already going. Oh, we'll just make it here and just make it a little bit different. And
well, there was another producer called Glenn A. Larson, and he used to copy films and make a series, but change the names and stuff and get away with it. So there was like Alias Smith and Jones, a Western cowboy, which was obviously the Sundance Kid, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. It's obvious, right? He made all these shows. He used to be known by a name of Glenn Larceny, because he used to steal from everybody. Glenn A. Larceny is what they used to call him. But, I mean, he made some good shows. Battlestar Galactica, but of course, Battlestar looked a bit like sort of Star Wars-y kind of around the same time, yeah. Glenn A. Larceny, they used to call him in Hollywood. I don't know what they call Reg, but the thing about Reg, and I mean, I've never met any of these people, but of course, in Melbourne, that was very much a Crawford's kind of thing. If you were doing production, I mean, Matlock Police and all that kind of stuff. And it was quite odd because at the time, Reg Grundy was known as, you know, Sale of the Century or something like that, you know. So it's quite strange to make a show like Prisoner, which is basically a drama, which I don't know. I mean, you probably know. Had Reg done any dramas before as such?
I don't think so, no, because obviously, you know, they did Neighbours and Prisoner, and then it all just.
Well, that was afterwards.
Yeah.
But I mean, was it something like The Box or Number 96 or something? Was that Reg Grundy?
I don't know.
I can't remember now.
Actually, I've got it. It's some number. I've got.
Oh, have you? He's a man with a. Oh, look at that Number 96 book. That is tragic. That is tragic.
Nigel Giles, who I know. Yeah, he wrote this.
I can't believe there's a book out on it.
Well, Number 96.
Oh my God. Because it was, I mean, it was just television, wasn't it? For an hour of every week.
I'm curious to know who did bring out Number 96. I think it was Crawford's.
Dick Crawford's? I can't remember now.
I'm going to check. We're going to fact.
But the thing is, at the time, you know, look, I joined that show, and I was. And I'll tell you a couple of stories that I remember when I was there in the station, right? I remember one day I went and sat down in the restaurant area.
It just says channel, the O Channel 10 network. It doesn't actually have...
yeah, it may not.
Cash Farm and Television.
Right, okay. Well, maybe it wasn't. But,
yeah.
I mean, I don't... So maybe it was the first drama they did. But the thing that always impressed me... The actors were really good, right? I mean, some of the dialogue they had, you sort of think, you know, whatever. But the way they portrayed those characters, they were very distinctive characters. You had, you know, Sheila Florence playing Lizzie, and you had Val Lehman. They all had a place to play. And it's a bit like what I used to be described as the Are You Being Served casting or the Dad's Army casting. You had the tall one, the fat one, the officious one, the funny one, the dodgy one. You know, you had these almost like cutouts of people. And that's what Prisoner had. You had the goodies and the baddies. You had the bad prison person, the good prison person, you know, and that really, and I'll tell you something that happened. When I worked on the show, the little that I did do on it, I never really respected the show much because a lot of the crew would say, "Oh, we're doing another bloody fire next week," and "Oh, there's escapes on Thursday." You know, it's by the time you get to that stage, it's a sausage making machine.
Yeah, and I guess we as fans we don't see that. We're all excited, whereas you it's a job, and you know you're working hard, and it's a different process.
And you think, what a dream job.
Yeah.
Well, tell that to the staging crew that had to move sets around for 3 days at full speed, or camera people that had to get everything right on the first. It was a really struggle to do this. And the thing that I remember, I think the actors were terrific. And these were roles, and this is just a general thing appreciative of the show. At the time, there weren't that many good roles for women in Australian TV. 100%. There really were. I'm just going to correct something on my screen. Oh, hold on a minute. Are you still there? Yes. Hold on a minute. I've got a little pop-up thing. Sorry about that. At the time, if you were a female actor in Australia, or actress as they used to be called, well, what job opportunities were there for a meaty role, right? Okay. Secretary to the doctor in Young Doctors, or a nurse, right? Okay, what else? There wasn't much to choose. The thing about Prisoner is that it gave roles to women. And if you look at the cast list, 90% of the people in it are women, right? So you imagine how that turnover in a limited television market in Australia affected female actresses. Sigrid Thornton, Peter Topano, you know, they became big names. I don't know whether they're big names at the time, but they certainly became that. And it always, you know, when I look back at the show, and I've seen some episodes not so long ago that's running on Channel 5 here and one of the cable
it's running at the moment over there,
yeah. And occasionally, I watch this, you know, oh, God, there's that bloody car that used to be parked around the, you know, it's this kind of stuff. And it does take me back quite a bit. You know, when you look at how those women are doing those roles, and the strength of the background to each of those roles. I mean, I wasn't there when Frankie was on, but everybody remembers Frankie.
Yeah.
And she had a real motive for her character. And a lot of dramas, other stuff. I mean, what was the drama in Young Doctors? Well, somebody rushing in all quick, but there was no real depth to the characters.
Right.
Whereas I think on Prisoner there was. And maybe that's the reason why it's so popular still now. Because those roles and the way they were portrayed. And I mean, you think about it, if you're an actress and you've been given a role of a prisoner who's committed mass murder and has a psychological problems, you can really act that role.
And
right?
I think the big difference with Prisoner was, one thing I've learned since doing this podcast was a lot of their background was theatre with these actresses.
Yeah. I mean, they weren't telly people. Yeah. I mean, a lot of them, I think Val was a theatre person from Sydney, I think, if I remember right.
Theatre, I mean, a lot of them was so many theatre shows.
Yeah. But you know, the thing that the abiding memory I always have is, well, I'll give you an example. I was saying this before, I went into the restaurant area to have something to eat, and I remember standing getting something.
Yeah, so Channel 10 had that restaurant called, they had a fence that came from Channel 10 there was a restaurant on the outside of the building.
No, not when I was there. I think there was another food area for the audiences in the tunnel, I think, underneath.
Yeah, I think there was a restaurant called Denny's at the time. I think it was called Denny's, and I remember that.
I just used to remember it as the Channel 10 canteen.
Right? The one inside the store. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I think, as I remember, you walked down the corridor from where we were up to the front of the building, and it was sort of on one side, I think it was on the left, and it had windows so you could see out. So that area where you sometimes see vehicles turning up on Prisoner with the gates open, it was sort of looking out into that area, right? And I remember that I was standing there, and I got chatting to this woman that was standing next to me, and we were doing something. She said, "Oh, could you? Yeah, thanks very much. Oh, how are you?" Said, "Oh, you're not too bad." Blah blah. And I'm looking at it, I said, "God, what a gorgeous looking woman. This is standing next to me." And I'm like, "Wow, she looks good," you know. And I sat down and I'm eating, and I looked over, and I think she was sitting somewhere else, and I thought, "Oh my God, that's Fiona Spence." That's because I mean, what was her name in the show? What was
Vera Vinegar Tits.
Vinegar Tits. That's it. I'm thinking, yeah, and I thought to myself, that's Vinegar Tits. Bloody hell! And of course, the thing was, once they put the hair, sculpted hair, the hard look, the very, and the very.
She was a very beautiful woman with the hair and makeup and.
Absolutely. I thought that is bloody Fiona Spence. And this is incredible. She looked glamorous and everything. And in fact, many of them did. They came in before makeup and hair and costume. And you thought, oh, yeah, not nice. Even Val Lehman looked presentable, And, then you see them 2 hours later and they look like, they look like they're going to take your wallet off you when you're not looking. I mean, that was quite incredible to see that. And I remember a couple of years later when I was over at the ABC, I didn't do much with the actors. I'm in an art department office. Occasionally I'd go in the studio. Maybe across the course of a month, maybe half a dozen times.
Did you ever walk around like the set and just say like the governor's office, for an example?
Yeah,
walk in there.
Yeah. Well,
we should have something on.
Well, Tommy, does Grundy's watch this? Does anybody from Grundy's watch your podcast?
Well, obviously Grundy's got brought out by Fremantle now, and
look, I think we can get away with it. I've got to admit, this is on camera, right? I'm admitting this, and I told the people in Birmingham my story because I actually committed quite a heinous crime in Erica's office.
Oh, right? Okay.
Yeah, this was in 1983. And I'd gone into the prison set and there was nobody there. It was a day, I think, when they were out filming locations. So I was on my own. And I think I went in there to replace, there was a fire hydrant and the label had come off. And I put the label, glued it back on and stuck it back up there, right? And I thought, I'll have a little wander around because I hadn't seen the set for a while. And I wandered around and I went into Erica's office area. Erica Davidson, wasn't it? Yeah. And I went into the office, and I have to admit something, and I hold my hands up to this, that I stole something from the set. and I'm gonna show you what I stole.
You still got it?
I've still got it. I actually stole this. This used to sit. Now it's called ITC Entertains the World, right? And I'm a big fan of Jerry Anderson shows and a lot of action shows of the 70s, right? There it is there. So this is shows like The Saint. Oh, look, Prisoner, but different one. It's one over the corner there, right? Mm-hmm. And this is this beautiful book they used to send to TV stations to promote the various TV shows that they were making, right? And it's really glossy, and it was sent around the world. One side's in English, the other side's in French. And I saw that, and I thought, oh, God, I must have it, And so what I did, it was in this lovely case thing. It was just used.
Erica's office on the bookshelf.
Yeah, it was on one of the bookshelves. I can't remember if it was the one behind her or the one opposite her. I can't remember now.
What the governor needs of a prison is a book like that.
Well, obviously, it had been put there just to take up space because it looks quite official, doesn't it? Yeah. A folder. And there are other books there, sort of with like other things written on them, sort of costings for the prison for the year or whatever. And this was sitting there really to take up space. And I remember that I sort of looked around at her and I noticed it's gone. And I remember taking it out and looking at it and then thinking, is this going to bugger up the continuity? Because they might, the last shot they might have done was of Erica sitting there, and then they've gone off to film, and they've come out and said, right, Erica, just pick it up from where you were before. And suddenly, there's this big gap, in the set. So I thought, oh, they won't notice. So literally for about 3 weeks afterwards, I'm sitting in the art department thinking, they don't find out. Oh, God, what's going on here? I was so worried. But anyway, they never caught me, and I still have this to this day. Yeah. That is guaranteed from Erica Davidson's office in prison around about 1983. And if there's anybody out there that can spot the episode where this is there and the next episode it's gone, let me know.
That'd be great.
I really appreciate it. But yeah, so I finally admitted my crimes, and I expect to knock on the door from Grundy's or Fremantle moment now.
Get the book back. I mean, what?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in England, but that won't stop them.
Sorry,
Matt.
for you as like at a young age, just walking around the set of Prisoner. I mean, that would have been.
Well, it's different now because when I was walking around that set, it's another television show, albeit at that time quite a popular one and well known. But it's a bit like, I left just as they were taking the sets for Prisoner out and they were replacing them with I don't know whether I've got this right, but eventually I left, but I used to go back and visit. I used to go and see Noel occasionally or Brad to see how they were if I was up that neck of the woods. And it got to the stage where they were winding Prisoner down. This was in the last maybe 30 episodes or something, and they were ramping up Neighbours. And they had the Neighbours sets that they'd had to rebuild because Channel 7 wouldn't sell them the sets that they had previously made.
How crazy is that?
Yeah, it's some strange thing. So they had the Neighbours sets put up in Studio A. I don't think at that stage, well, maybe we were still doing Young Turn Time on Saturday, but they were doing Neighbours sets during the week. So they had those sets in Studio A. Studio B still had the permanent set for Prisoner. And I always remember, the steam room props, like the big drums and stuff, they were stored outside the studio in a big cage. Oh, really? So if ever you needed to do that set, they used to build that set on the spare bit of the studio and then wheel in the steam things and the dryers and the washing machines and line them all up. And you can detect actually on those scenes, the sound is a bit more echoey because it was at the farthest corner of the studio. And sometimes I think they did some scenes in the actual, like the studio corridor area, the scenic bay, where it's open to to high set. They might have done some pickup shots there.
In the laundry scenes, you could always hear this loud noise in the background.
I think that was meant to be, part of the laundry set, but I think that it may well have been just the ambient noise of the set construction and set storage area. So you'd hear, just general background noise, maybe a bit of vehicle driving out or something like that. But I mean, you were saying there about, what an amazing thing to walk around that set. It didn't feel that amazing at the time because it was just, it's like saying, I went into my garage. It was there all the time. Yeah, and maybe I didn't appreciate enough what the show became. But for me, I was just walking around. It was a set and I'm thinking, God. And I mean, those bricks, the bricks were made out of 3mm plywood, right? Cut into brick shapes, stuck to a board. But the problem was that any brick wall you see should have mortar running through, like curved mortar running through the joints. Well, because they were made for only 14 episodes, they didn't bother, right? So it's either the best bricklayer that the world has ever known, who can do absolute perfectly straight gaps between the bricks, right? That looked bad. And the other thing that I thought was really odd, having worked many years in television since and worked on films and stuff, is that the sets were never aged.
Yeah, they
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the set,
Patsy, Erica's office, they changed after the fire, and then they had a new governor and a new office. And
did they? But when you have a television picture of a set and you light it, the problem is you have this problem in that everything looks a bit too bland and even. If you paint bricks red, they just look red. Whereas in real life, they've got little pits and marks in. And I think they sprayed the bricks with this texture thing. I think it was a bit of sawdust mixed in the paint to give it a texture. But the bricks weren't different colors. And if you look at brickwork, there's always a variation. Any building, each brick is going to be slightly different color. And the problem with something like Prisoner is that everything was too much the same. And I remember after I'd been there a while and I was starting to try and, make myself annoyance, but trying to make myself, important to them. I said, why don't we just, put a bit of rust on there and, dirty the bricks down? Because if this building's been going for a few years, this would have aged, dirt builds up on the sills and stuff like that. No, you can't do that because it will look wrong for continuity, from the previous episode. So the problem is, once you're on the train,
Can't get
you
off.
can't change carriages before you get off, So this was the problem for a while. And it's such a shame because I think that if you look at that show within these walls, it has brilliant lighting, brilliantly built sets. They look, and it's an older building, so you can do more with it, And London Weekend had a bigger budget. I mean, I think there were 4 or 5 series.
Great show. Amazing show.
Yeah, amazing drama, amazing actors. And the thing, if you look at the lighting in the cells and then compare it to Prisoner, it's chalk and cheese, literally, right? But that was a series that was made over a course of months, 13 episodes, with a decent budget, but with an experienced crew working on that show who had done other drama shows. Whereas Prisoner, it was like, right, well, remember you used to do that game show where you're now the camera person for the location or whatever, right? And I don't want to degrade their capability. They were very good. I'm amazed. They were able to swing these cameras down corridors and stuff. And it's like, and you haven't tripped over, I mean, incredible what they were able to do.
Ken Mulholland, who was hosting this with me when I first started it, and he was the captain from day one to the end.
Yeah, I don't remember ever meeting him, but yeah,
he was telling me, because he worked on other shows, and then he first come on Prisoner, and he said he never forgot the first episode where they had the riot, and all these women are coming down screaming at him down the corridor, and he's on the camera, and he said it was one of the frightening things in his life.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, you're going backwards and you're looking at this thing and stuff. It's a bit disorientating.
Yeah. Amazing. Go back within these walls. It's really sad because I'm starting to interview cast from other prison shows as well, and
so
many of the cast that have passed on from that show. There's hardly.
Well, I mean, this was a point that was brought up when I went to a recent event here, the one in Birmingham. I think it's Silver Star or Screen or something productions. They're like in Britain, they do a lot of interviews and stuff, bring over cast members all the way from Oz for a couple of rainy days in Birmingham talking with fans. I think it's amazing. What was I saying? I'm amazed now when I meet fans just how dedicated they are to this show, right? And there seems to, and I'm a fan of things. I'm a fan of the Jerry Anderson shows, UFOs, Space Night Thunderbirds, things like that, right? Science fiction shows, good dramas, you name it, spy shows. And it was really quite eye-opening when I went to this event, because you're meeting people who, you have a connection to a show that they love, albeit a very small, tenuous connection. Not like the actors who were in the show, but you work on it. And one of them said to me, it's the first time we've ever had a production person on the show at one of these events. And I said to him, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, when I joined Channel 10, I was like 21 years old, 22 maybe, right? So I was the youngest one there. I think there was one cameraman that was my age. And then the anybody younger than that was in the cast of Young Talent Time. I mean, there was nobody else, So obviously, we are now getting an age. How long ago was this show made?
1978.
48, so 45 years or whatever it was. I mean, I was there maybe 42 years ago or whatever. So, you add up the numbers. And of course, I remember at the time, most of those camera people would have been in their 40s or 50s, right? So you add another 40 on there, they're now in their 70s, 80s, 90s, right? So consequently, I mean, there aren't that many production people about. I don't know whether Brad Ross is still around. I don't know whether Noel Parker is. I live in England, so I wouldn't know. It's a long, long time ago. But I mean, the reality of all of this is that, not only the actresses obviously thinning their ranks, but also the people that worked on the show. I was going to mention the little Lizzie Birdsworth thing. I saw her over at ABC TV once, and this was about 3 years after I'd left Channel 10. And she was sitting in the foyer at ABC in Ripon Lee. And as I say, Ripon Lee is next to Ripon Lee Estate, formal gardens, all that stuff.
Beautiful place.
And sorry?
A beautiful place, that estate.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
So I walked in, I went up to the front desk to sort something out, and I turned around and she was sitting there, Sheila Florence. And this was probably about 2 years after Prisoner had finished, maybe, or a year after, something like that. And she looked at me and she goes, "Oh, you used to work at Channel 10, didn't you?" I said, "Oh, you remember me?" "Oh, yeah." And I think she used to spend a lot of time sitting around with, watching the world go by before she went on. And I said, "Yeah, that's right." And she goes, "Oh," she said, "I've just walked in here and I've looked at the gardens out there and they're a sorry state, aren't they?" And I said, "Really?" She goes, "Oh, yes, when I used to work here, they were beautiful because apparently the gardener from Ripon Lee Estate used to do the gardens out in the car park area of Ripon Lee."
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah. So, and I said, "Oh, really? Oh, they were beautiful. It was in bloom and all that stuff." She was telling me about all this gardening stuff. And I thought, oh, well, she must have acted in some shows at the ABC, or been on the Saturday show or something like that, right? But then somebody said, "Oh, no, she used to be a floor manager." And I went, "What?
I never knew that."
Floor manager?" And I'm sure it was her. And I was, incredulous as well. I said, "She was a floor manager. She's only about like this tall. I mean, a gust of wind would knock her over." And I was like, "Yeah." And apparently I was told, now whether this is true, there's actually quite a few odd stories about Sheila Florence, about what she'd been through in her life, and some of it doesn't make sense. But apparently one of her first jobs in television was working as a floor manager. So maybe you could check that out and in your books there and find out. But that's what
I'll ask around, because I never heard that. And you said, you just mentioned a really important point where there's all these different stories now. And that's one thing I struggle with, is because so many people have passed away, and then you start hearing all these different stories that can never, ever be verified.
Be confirmed or denied. No, I know. And I mean, I don't even know, because they came to me secondhand, these stories. So I don't even know. And sometimes the myth continues because one person says it, another person picks it up and repeats it and so on. But I mean, I do remember that somebody said to me that she was big into gardening, that apparently if you drove down the street where she lived, I think it was in St Kilda or somewhere, Elwood
Street, St Kilda, yeah.
Was it? Apparently people say if you drive down that street, everybody's got normal gardens. It's like botanical gardens. It's like the blooming festival of Melbourne. You could sell tickets to go around a garden.
Fans that actually go and visit her grave every year. It's
really.
Yeah, I find that like.
Is it nicely tended with lots of plants and flowers?
Oh, I think they put some plants, and someone puts a wine bottle, and
oh, really? Oh no, she was amazing. I mean, I don't remember many of the actresses. What I remember is those occasions where, as I said before, where I'm at the restaurant thing and who's that? Gosh, she's a good look. Oh my God, it's really good tits. It's this kind of stuff. I mean, it's really quite a shock. And I think that's a tribute not only to the talent of the makeup and hair people, but also the way they played those roles. Definitely. I mean, as I said before, they were meaty roles for women. They weren't sitting at a desk, in the dentist waiting room, saying, "Oh, yes, next to." Oh, I've got to tell you this, right? Dentist, this just reminded me. Okay, there was a character in the show that used to come in and out of the show regularly, one of the guards, played by a lady called Joy Westmore.
Oh, yeah,
Joy Westmore, right? She I think she's through the Annie Sigley show and other things, Don Lane or something. Well, when I was a kid living in Melbourne, we used to live at a place called Karen, right, down near sort of Frankston way on the bay. I moved from the UK with the rest of my family. I was only like 11 years old, and we moved down there, and we were living there for a while. And we used to go to a dentist in Seaford, which is the next sort of place, on the way to Frankston. And the dentist that I used to go was a Dr. Westmore. And when you opened the door, guess who was sitting on the reception desk? Joy Westmore.
Oh, Joy Westmore. Oh,
Joy Westmore used to sit on the reception desk of her husband's dental practice in Seaford, right? And I remember that if you look at how often she was in the show, she'd be in like a run of like 4 episodes.
Yeah.
I think you wouldn't see her for a month, and then she'd be in another two. I was like, well, what is she doing? She's a part-time worker or something, or she's skiving off work. Well, the reason why is because she used to fill in as the dental secretary for her husband. And I remember that I was on set one day, and she was there, and I said, "Oh, Joy," I said, "I used to come to the dental surgery that your husband ran to get my teeth." She goes, "You kidding me?" I said, "No, I used to come in. I remember you used to sit there." He goes, "Yeah, that's right, blah, blah, blah." So there are people, yeah, I mean, so I'd actually met Joy many, many years before. And I think at the time, she was doing Ernie Sigley or something. And that's the reason why we knew her, not because of Prisoner.
Yeah.
And it was only years later when I was working on it. And I remember seeing her in a corridor or something. And I said, "Oh, I just want to mention this. I used to be, your husband's patient." Yeah, we had a bit of a chat about that. But
we nearly had it come on Talking Prisoner before.
Really?
Yeah. I had it arranged to I think it was when one of the lockdowns ended, and she wasn't well towards the end of her life, and she was in a home, but I was liaising
really?
with her, and
okay.
Yeah, and we were going to go and see her and shoot an interview, a small interview, not a big one. And then sadly all the lockdowns, and then she passed away. So it was really sad.
How long ago was that?
I think she passed away 21, 22.
Oh, really? So not that long ago.
Not long ago. But
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, who else is still around? Because I mean, out of those main players, I mean, the woman that played Frankie, is she still about?
Oh no, Carol, she passed away.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, right. There's a few that sadly passed away. Judith McGrath, who played Colleen Powell.
What about Colette Mann? Is she still about?
Yeah, she's still around. Yeah, she's like Colette. Yeah. We had her on last year, I think it was. Yeah, she's great.
Well, I can imagine that was a bit of a laugh.
Yeah, no, she's good. She's I think some of the cast have got, and I didn't realize until I started doing this podcast is, we think that Prisoner was their life. And, Maggie pointed it out on the podcast when we interviewed Maggie. She was very upfront and said, Prisoner was only 4 years of my life, and it was a job, and it paid, and I guess as fans, we don't, we didn't see it like that. We're like, Prisoner must be everything to you. And at the end of the day, it was their job. They got paid, they went home, and, so
it was regular employment for an actress, and that's pretty hard to come by.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, if you got a major role, I mean, the thing I used to think was funny is that if you had an actress come in the show, maybe they're only booked for 5 episodes or something, right? But if the audience liked their character, then they had to write in some way to keep her in the prison, right? So usually the reason why an actress would stay on board is because in the show she's committed some heinous crime which has kept her in the prison. Right? So I thought it's great that your role, your longevity was based upon how bad a character was, in breaking how many times they broke the law. I thought that was brilliant. I'll rob a bank and that means I'm in the rest of the year, this kind of thing. It was an interesting little show. And as I say, that's absolutely right. For me, it was a year, but it was less than a year. I was working 90% of my time on Young Time. I was then working 10% on everything else. And some of that included Prisoner.
And of course, you get to work with Johnny Young a lot when you're on Young Talent Time? Or?
Well, I mean, you all do because you're part of that team. And I'm sure other production people will tell you this, that everybody in a television role, whether it's a camera person or a camera assistant that moving the cables or the props guys or set construction, we each have that part of, we're each a cog in a big wheel. Yeah. And the reason that show exists is because each of those efforts that each of us have made, right? That's what makes your TV show. So, yes, you'll be on set and Johnny Young will be doing it, but, I'm not sitting there next to Johnny Young going, oh, how you doing? I mean, and also because I was like the youngest one there on the production side, I was closest in age to some of the young talent time kids. So you might have 14 or 15-year-olds there, and they might come and speak to me about something that they might not come and speak to one of the older people about. Oh, should I do this? And I'm thinking, I don't know, but I'm somebody that's like their older brother rather than, somebody much older. And I remember that happening a few times, not very often, but occasionally, because I was younger, I was more, and I remember my younger brother, Darren, used to come up and help me on Young Talent Time on Saturdays. And I'm still at a loss to work out what he actually did for me, because I spent most of the time just chatting to the girls that were about his age, And I remember a couple of times Kylie would come in with her mum and I think her brother to watch Danny in the show during the day, the rehearsals. And I used to turn around and think, where's Darren gone? Where is he? Oh, he's talking to Danny's sister again. Darren, come down here, right? Come on down here, help me, blah, blah, blah. And it's quite funny because years later I met Kylie and I told her this story and we got a selfie and all that sort of stuff. And I said, well, I'll send it to my brother and say, do you remember that girl you used to chat to? I met her.
What a career she's had. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. She actually came in to do an interview for our morning breakfast show and BBC Breakfast, and it was a pre-record, and I happened to be there, and she looked up and saw me and gave me a funny look, and I don't think she recognized me, but she thought, I've seen him somewhere before. What's going on here? And we had a little chat and a catch-up, and I walked around that newsroom like a god for about the next 3 days as a result of it.
I was like, well, what's the association with you and Kylie?
Well, it's just that, exactly. People going, well, why is Jeff talking to Kylie? What's going on there? And of course, this is the thing. When you have a career of doing many different things in television, you've met many people, and at some point, your paths might cross again, or you might see something. And of course, I'm in England. I'm, in Manchester, working for BBC, and there's Kylie. And when I said to her, I used to work at Channel 10 in Melbourne on Young Talent Time, she goes, you look too young to have worked on Young Talent Time. Like, what's going on? You worked on Young? I said, yeah. So how bizarre. She's halfway around the world. This is 45 years ago, and she's met some guy who used to stand there while she was sitting watching the show with her mum when she was 17. Eh?
Well, your brother was chatting her up.
yeah, sometimes. I think he was very keen on Karen Dunkerton or one of the other ones, I think, or Vanessa or somebody as well. I think he liked to spread his kind of, he wanted to have the choice there. Frankly, I'd been quite happy with Kylie. I mean, she's a bit younger than me at that time, probably too young, but, who knows what could have happened at that stage. But I mean, this is the thing about, I eventually ended up coming over to the UK in the late 80s. And I worked for Thames Television for a while on a children's show called The Sooty Show, which was a puppet show.
Sooty Show,
and I worked on that. I made a radio-controlled Sooty, and I wrote an episode of the show and did some other things. Then I went back to Australia. I worked freelance for a while, and then I went to work for a guy that I met, very nice chap who I had a lot in common with. He was a filmmaker from New Zealand, and his name was Peter Jackson. You probably heard of him somewhere along the line, I expect. Yeah. And I used to go over to New Zealand to go and work on various things that were there. They'd say, could you come over? We're doing Xena Warrior Princess. We've got work. So I'd work on that. And then the idea was, I remember they flew me over there once to direct some TV commercials that Peter's company were making, but Peter was busy writing a script for the upcoming film. I don't know which one. It's probably, I don't think it was Lord of the Rings. I think it might have been King Kong. And so I was sort of directing. It was a stop motion character it was a parrot to do with Polly Stripper, and all these feathers fell off. Polly Stripper, yeah, stripped off, yeah, you get it. It was a great commercial, literally. And I went over there to co-direct those and stuff like that. So then I came back to Australia. I worked in post-production, computer graphics. And then eventually myself and my wife were looking at whether we wanted to go back to New Zealand permanently to work, because obviously Peter was building things up. Every time I went there, things improved. First time you get to the airport, it's like, getting a cab. Next time the PA picks you up. Next time they've got a hire car with a driver, that everything went up and up. And but I managed to. I was offered a job in the UK for a big animation company in Bristol. I took that. I did that for a while. Then I became a DVD producer. I used to produce extras for DVDs.
Oh.
So an American company selling British shows. Can you get any interviews with the cast and stuff? So we did things like I went out and did a couple of commentaries at Pinewood Studios with Roger Moore, who came in to talk about. We remember a show called The Persuaders?
Yes.
Yeah, with the two Playboy kind of characters, 1970s. He came in to talk about that. And I remember we surprised him because we actually tracked down the original car, the Aston Martin he drove in the series. And I always remember ringing up this.
Track something like that down. That's
well, somebody tipped me off to where this car might be, and I rang the guy and I said, "Look, you own this car from the Persuaders, the one that Roger Moore drove, Brett Sinclair." And he said, "Yeah, that's right." I said, "Oh, right. Okay. Look, is there any way you could get over to Pinewood Studios at all? Because there's a little event." "Oh, mate, I've just spent 50 grand on it. I've put, everything down to the nuts on the wheels. Everything's been redone. It's perfect, So anyway, I said to him, "So I'm assuming you're a Roger Moore fan." "Oh, huge fan." I said, "Well, here's the thing. If you can bring the car down to Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire on like next Friday, you can have lunch with Roger Moore." And this guy, you could hear on the phone, he went, "What?" And I said, "You can have lunch with the rest of us." Where I'm like, "What time do you want me there? Where do you want me?" That was the deal.
So before you threw Roger Moore and he was thinking, "Oh, I want a fee out of this. I'm gonna."
Yeah. Well, he was more concerned about the car getting wet. Because he'd done so much work on it. "I can't take it out. It's a drop of rain. It doesn't go out." Well, when I told him Roger Moore, it was like, "Yeah, I'll be there. Come on, mate." And the funny thing is this is the best bit. So we did the commentary with Roger, the production manager, a guy called Johnny Goodman, who went on to produce other stuff like Minder, and was the production, big thing with Euston Films, which was television film arm like the Sweeney and stuff like that. And we had the guy who was the producer of The Persuaders, whose name escapes me. It might come to me in a moment, but he was on there as well. And they all know each other, right? So when we had the first commentary in the morning, so we're all sitting there and we go through the episode and they talk about the role and talk about this, that, and the other. And then I said to them, "Oh, we'll go and take some lunch, but I know a quick way round to the restaurant."
Robert Baker, by any chance?
Robert S. Baker, yeah, Bob Baker, yeah. Lovely guy. One of those kind of almost mogul kind of things, sort of, "I'll see you right, mate," all this kind of stuff. Lovely guy. And so anyway, we went through the back of the studio block next door from where the recording studio was. And there is this car that he drove. Like the last time he saw it was 1973, right? With the owner of the car standing in front of it. And this is what Roger said. He says to me, "It's not." I said, "It is. That's the actual car." And he went, "My God." And he's looking around it. And he goes up to the new owner, who's a huge Persuaders Roger Moore fan, and said, "Are you the owner?" "Yeah." "How long have you had the car?" "Oh, about 2 years or whatever." He goes, He says, "You didn't happen to find a pack of cigarettes in the glove compartment? Because I'm sure I left a packet there when we finished the series." This is like 25 years ago, And that was Roger all over. Lovely guy. And it's funny that you meet all these people, throughout your career. And, it means you've always got a little story that you remember to do with that person, who to other people, it's like, "You met Roger Moore, you did this, you did," and it's wrong. And I get the same thing now when I was at this event from people saying, "You worked on Prisoner, you did this, you did that." And to me, it was the first job in telly, so it was important. But I never realized at that time how big a deal it was. If I did, I'd have stolen more books from Erica's team, and I'd be selling them on eBay. You don't realize when you do these things what they become. So now you look back and you think, wow, that is quite something. And I mentioned to other people, "Oh, I worked for a while on," "You've worked on this? What?" And, because I live in the UK, I was able to go down to this event in Birmingham. It's an hour on a train, which also, I'm very cheap. I'm a cheap guest, basically. You don't have to fly me in from Australia. I'm already here, up the road. And I met some of the cast there. I don't remember ever meeting them when I was on the show at Channel 10 because, as I say, I wasn't a studio guy. I was one of the guys outside. I wasn't, cameras or sets or anything. I was outside of all of that. And as I say, there was some people were employed by Grundy's, some were employed by Channel 10. I was a Channel 10 guy. So that's a bit of a difference. But
funny, you're talking about the car. So just going back to Roger Moore and the car is there's so many cars from movies and shows that have become so iconic. Do you remember? Did you ever watch Columbo?
Oh yeah, the old with the Mac, Peter Falk, and the old out car that you used to have. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think he took that car off the back lot of the studios. He goes, "Oh, I want that car to be, that's the one." And it was just some bomb sitting there. They don't even know why it was there. And someone found the car not long ago, and it's pretty like in bad condition. I think they're going to try and restore it somehow, but it's amazing to think all these years later. And I mean, Quentin Tarantino, we talked about it on a podcast recently, how he's kept all the cars from his movies. He's got like a whole massive, collection of cars from Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, all these movies.
Right. I hope he's cleaned the interior of that one with all the blood on it from the guy that got shot. I hope he isn't driving around. There's all bits of, congealed blood on the back seat. And he's like to Quentin, could you clean your car, mate?
Well, he talks about how he used real cars. I mean, he said, he wants to do a smash. He wants a real. He wants them to smash. Like, he's not doing CGI or anything like that.
Well, Quentin is a huge fan of an Aussie movie made during the time of the 1970s, which fits into the Oz-exploitation films. It's a film called The Man from Hong Kong. And it's got, and if you watch this, it's quite fascinating because it's got the guy who played James Bond once, the Aussie actor, at Lazenby, George Lazenby.
George, yeah. He's retired, actually. He's just retired.
Oh, was he? Right. About time. He was, they got him on board. And there were a time when they were making Aussie movies and they were trying to make them so that overseas audience would internationalize them, And The Man from Hong Kong is apparently one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite films. And it's got some really good action sequences in. Wow. And that was the thing. There was an episode. Tell me if there was an episode where one of the people, the escapees in Prisoner, leapt onto the top of a truck, like a
laundry truck. Yeah, that was Amanda Muggleton, Chrissy Latham. Right. Yeah.
Right. And I remember being there that day.
Oh, you were
because
there?
Yeah. So it must have been about 83 when that episode was made, because I remember that we couldn't get out of the loading bay. Where the art department was, he walked out, there were all these cars. I'm like, what's going on? No, we can't because we're setting this thing up. So they had to block off the loading bay area inside and outside so they could set this thing up for her to jump off and slide down the rope or something. And I remember that for probably about 2 hours, they were setting it up and shooting it. I don't know whether they did any retakes. I wasn't there for the actual filming, but I was there in the art department, like, what's all this noise kind of thing, and why are all these vans? And it was because they had to then prepare for the thing to go up, the truck to come out, stop, and then her or a stunt person, I assume, to jump on the thing and drive away. And I remember I was there that day, and I'm pretty sure that was when I was working there. It wasn't like on one of my little occasional visits. It was actually there. And I mean, I did go back to work there for freelance occasionally. And I remember that Noel had the head, the severed head from one
David
of the
episodes. Yeah, which he's still got. David Bridges, who played David Bridges, the officer. Is that
right?
Yeah, I interviewed him just recently, and
oh really?
The photo of the whatever they made. What's it called?
It's a prosthetic.
Head.
Yeah. Made by freelance special effects makeup artists. They brought in specially to do it.
And David said when they made it on him, he said it was terrifying.
Face cast.
only
Yeah.
thing he had to breathe was two straws coming out of his nose. He said if they pulled those straws out, he looked.
I did a headcast once with Santo Solaro from the Degeneration, and I think Magda Sabanska did a half one, and she got a bit panicked because you're inside this thing. Santo was as cool as a cucumber, and we did a whole cast of him, and it's dental alginate with a plaster case, and then you take them out. But you're right, you give these breathing holes. It's done very different now. You do a scan, and you because the problem with alginate is that it weighs on your face a bit, which means that the impression you get is always of a face which has got something heavy on it, so it never quite looks right. But they made that head, and I remember it used to hang up in Noel Parker's little caged office area at the back. And it used to be on like hanging up against the cage thing. And I remember one day I went down there and I said, I went to see him, he's a mate kind of thing and workmate. And I went down there once and it wasn't there. And I said, where's the head? He said, it's disappeared. We don't know where it's gone. And I said, really? He said, no, it's been half inched, And I went, oh, right. So either it had been borrowed and nobody brought it back. Hey, no, I kept to what I describe as white collar crime or blue, not murdering and chopping people's heads off. Theft. It's a very different thing. I mean, I'm basically having that long-term loan. That's like a library book, right?
Like that episode of Seinfeld with the library inspector that came 30 years later to get the book.
Oh, did it? Well, maybe, as I say, if I get a knock on the door about 3:00 in the morning from somebody from Fremantle with an Aussie accent, oh no, I'm already worried because I actually I owe some money to Santo Solaro for the fact that he mentioned my name in one of the episodes of The Degeneration, and you don't want to cross Italians, obviously, right?
Isn't it funny about things from sets that have been missing over the years, though? It's on Seinfeld. I don't know if you've watched Seinfeld before, but they
yeah, I've seen it occasionally, a long time ago.
This painting of Kramer. He was modeling for
right.
And so it's an iconic painting, but they've never found it. It's disappeared, and so many people have looked for it to this day.
It'll be somewhere. I mean, the thing is, you work on a show, and there are occasionally times where I think the series is finished. This is going to be chucked out. I'll take it with me, right? And I've taken a few things, minor things, nothing major. I mean, it's like a little memento of your time, because the problem with working in TV is that, unlike, if you go and work in a bank, you could work there for 30 or 40 years, right? When you work on a TV show, you might only be on it for 6 months or a year. A feature film, you might only be on for 3 months. I mean, I worked on Anzac, so I was only on it for 3 months, a miniseries.
So you were on that. I've actually, downstairs, I've got all the original photos, the scripts from that.
From Anzacs?
Yeah.
Because I remember it was Paul Hogan's first kind of dramatic role. And I remember that he was so green at the time that I was standing on this battlefield, World War I battlefield, up a place called Beveridge, which is north of Melbourne. It's out in the countryside. Looks a bit like European thing with European trees and stuff. And they built a French village there, and they did this and they did that. And I remember that Paul Hogan, what we used to do is, they used to have these air cannons that would throw debris up in the air and have a flash, so it looked like there were bombs going off, but you could stand right next to them. They were just compressed air. But what we used to do is you'd put posts with numbers of these on the top. They were like lollipop things, and it had 4, 5, 6. And we'd rehearse it by saying 5, bang, 6, bang, like that, as the soldiers run through, so they know roughly when these things are cued so they can react to them. Yep. And I remember that Paul Hogan went running through it and he said, how am I going to get through this with all these signs? And I said, well, when we do the tape, we take the poles out. It's like, we don't, you don't see a battlefield where there's little popsicle sticks with numbers on saying that's where the next bomb's going to land. I mean, and that was, and I mean, he's a nice guy. There were a lovely bunch of people. I think the other actors on it, Matthew Sweet, was it, or somebody? There was a lot of very fine actors. And I mean, I remember somebody saying to me, oh, he's really doing this larrikin Aussie character in the show because he's planning out a feature film with a larrikin kind of character thing as well. Even though they were set at different times and different places, he wanted to get, up to then, he'd done all of his things were comedy based. And I think he wanted to know whether he could do drama with a funny edge to it, which is what he did.
Well, a lady called Jan Webb who worked on Neighbours, her husband passed away, but he was a director on Neighbours. His name escapes me, but yeah, he was on Anzacs, and so she sold me all this stuff from Neighbours and Anzac. The stuff from Anzac's incredible, like all original photos signed by like Paul Hogan. And
there was a very famous photo that went out in the Sunday newspapers with all these soldiers sitting around in the hot sun, and they were sitting leaning up against my car that was parked. It was an old Austin 1800. It was the first car I owned. It was a crap car, but. So on the newspaper on the weekend, so I'd be filming it off here. I don't know where I'm thinking, that's my bloody car. All these people are like taking shade, sitting in the shade of the car. I'm thinking, bloody cheek, my car. I mean, it was a good appearance. I thought maybe I might get a bit extra for that, but I never did.
Send you some photos of the Anzac stuff. It's incredible.
Yeah, you'll have to see if you've got the photo of an Austin 1800, because that's mine.
To be honest, she gave me this whole suitcase full of like framed photos. I haven't even gone right through it yet.
Look, we'll have a chat afterwards sometime, and you can
have a look
at
the photos. But I've also got some uniforms from Prisoner too, original uniforms.
Really?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah, I've got the gate guard's jacket. I've got inmate's dress and one of the officers' uniforms as well.
Really?
I've got a lot of money for them, but
have you got Fiona Spence's underwear by any chance?
No. Do you want me to say?
Oh, that's a shame. That's a shame. That's a personal blow to me, quite honestly. But look, is there? I mean, from a fan perspective, I'm not a fan of the show, although I do have a lot of respect for it now, knowing the struggles we had to get that program out and knowing what those actors went through and the production team. I mean, from a fan perspective, what is it from your perspective or what you've heard from other fans as to why they enjoy this show, why they're sort of addicted to it?
I think, well, for me, I mean, my memories of it was, as a child, I'm a very nostalgic person. So I love, I love a lot of old TV shows, movies, like I could talk to you all day about UK comedies on the buses, how you've been served, keeping up appearances, open all hours. I mean, I just love all that stuff. And, when you watch something from back then, I mean, it brings up all these emotions inside of you, like I don't know what it is, but Prisoner, in particular was a show that I watched with my mum. I was like 8 or 9 years old.
It's like that sort of nostalgia thing, but it's
nostalgia, but it's
your family around you, and you're going to school, and you go home, and then in the evening you watch.
But it also stands up, and some people criticize the show, like you said, the walls wobble and all that. But I sort of, that annoys me because you got to look at it and go, hang on, this show was done in 1978, right? 45 years ago. Things are different now, but this show went for that long, 692 episodes, and had a show like a remake called Wentworth.
I've seen Wentworth. I thought Wentworth's excellent. It's a different kind of show because productions have changed and the kind of nature. It's like back in the 70s, there used to be a lot of kids' dramas. You don't see those anymore. I worked on a show.
There was a show in the UK that I used to love called CAB. Which was a kids drama, C.A.B, and it was a great show. It was a kids drama, but there was these kids that broke into an antique store and then they got stuck in there, and that was the series. It was a fascinating show.
See, those kind of programs don't really exist because the money isn't there to make them, and of course the other problem is, if it's a kids show, it's on a kids channel now.
Yeah.
which inevitably means that adults don't see it. So that
Well, and
means
what
that it
kids are
doesn't
watching
like,
TV now anyway? I mean,
well, yeah.
social media or YouTube now. So it's
Well, I wonder whether a show like Prisoner Cell Block H, the way it was made, it couldn't be made that way anymore. You can't make 2 hours of that drama and keep the standard up and all that stuff, even with the latest techniques. And you wouldn't want to.
no.
And I assume that the Wentworth is what, like a set number, like 26 episodes of series, is it, or
Something
something?
like
Or
that. They did, I think it
yeah,
was 7 seasons. And like that's a great show, but the diehard Prisoner fans are like, no, it's crap, it's shit. I'm not
it's like trying to remake the Beatles, isn't it? I mean,
well, it is.
you never,
Yeah, you can put that a bit aside. I mean, I was open to it, and I think it's a great
Oh,
show.
I think it's a good drama. Yeah, absolutely.
Really well done, and the cast were amazing. I was a bit weird using the names of the inmates from Prisoner or whichever, but
Yeah, you think that if they were doing something up to date, they'd just maybe they had some similar characters, like a Frankie kind of character or a Freak kind of character, but you think they just changed the names. But maybe they were hoping that the original people that watched the show would come back to it because those characters have been re-envisaged and stuff like that.
I'll
Maybe
tell you
there's
what it did do was, because I read a lot of comments on YouTube and things like that. Wentworth did do for Prisoner, ironically, was give Prisoner a new younger audience because the people that are watching Wentworth very young, and they're like, oh, hang on, this show was based on a show from the 70s in Melbourne. Oh, Prisoner. Wow, okay. So they're going back to watch episodes of Prisoner, which I think is why it's become even bigger than what it, has been in the
Yeah, I really like it. And the funny thing is, it's not just restricted to Australia. In the UK, it's a really big show. I think for a while it was a hugely popular show here. I mean, so was Neighbours and other
amazing.
things.
Yeah. I mean, my YouTube channel, which this will go on, Talking Prisoner. I mean, the core audience is from the UK.
Really, really.
Yeah, the core is from the UK, and I think it was last time I looked, it was like 76% men over 40 that are watching this.
My God, who would have thought it? No, look, as I say, at the time it was another job. It certainly was not big on my, like, if I was to write my CV, it's not, big, even though it's one of the first things I worked on. So it's sort of top of the CV, but it's not something that's, people say, oh, you worked on Prisoner. Oh, we'll get you in to do this. I mean, it was a fairly quick turnaround show. My contributions on it were minimal. And it was really just a case of, I happened to be around that thing at the time when that show was being made, when it was probably at its most popular. And I remember friends of mine would say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm working on this. I did a thing for Prisoner. I was like, you did that? They were incredible like that. Because you forget how big a show it was at that time. And then years later, when it's been repeated, suddenly it's built up this cult audience of people watching it. I remember in Britain, people saying, oh, I used to watch it when I was a student and I'd be watching it at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I got hooked, and all that stuff.
PCR,
Yeah. I mean, I think uni students, it was very popular with for a while because it's sort of, when they broadcast it, it fitted into their kind of, day at college and then chilling out in the evening or whatever. But no, look, I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of the other stuff, degeneration, stuff like that. And as I say, I did a podcast just last week with some people from the Champagne Comedy web page, which is to do with The Late Show and all these other productions that Working Dog have done. But again, you do these things at the time. That was another comedy show. I enjoyed working on it, and that then led to The Late Show, which became huge, and that then led to Frontline, which became huge. And
you never really know that at the time of doing these shows. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you do Prisoner, it's like, well, yeah, okay, like whatever, but you don't know it's going to.
I mean, Peter Jackson met me in his car when nobody knew who Peter Jackson was. I went round his house one day where he used to live, and he's making mold kits on his kitchen table for his next film. Right? Pete Jackson, right? And he's in this house where the back of the house is like a granite. Well, actually, it's the side of a mountain because the house was built into this thing, and it was really small. And then the next time I went over there, he'd moved to this much bigger house because obviously he'd made a bit of money on a few things, but he wasn't big name outside of New Zealand. I think it was when he did Heavenly Creatures, that was with Kate Winslet and Melanie Linsky, that he became a bit of a name and had some money. And I remember him moving into this big house by the bay with, you know, beautiful views out, looking out to sea and stuff like that. But I also remember going around the fish and chip shop to get something to eat for us all, and me paying because he didn't have any change on him. So, Peter Jackson, if you're watching, you still owe me for the fish and chips at Karaka Bay. I remember that's still there. No, look, you know, I speak to people, and this to me is normal, you know, to have worked on these things. And when I tell people things, and you know, I haven't done huge mega stuff, but I've done enough stuff to say, oh, I worked on that. And for some reason or another, these have become these really important, iconic things.
Yeah.
But at the time, we never appreciated that for what it was. And I'm happy to say that nowadays I sort of do. And I realize these were really important things to be involved with.
And we appreciate you. We appreciate you coming on and
well, if only I'd have worked on Are You Being Served Down Under, my life would have been complete. It really would.
That was a great interview I did with Mike Berry. Yeah, we got a lot of, actually, I haven't even put that up yet. That was a few years ago.
That'd be really interesting because, look, the fact is, that was it was Terry Croft, wasn't it? And I've met David Croft and Terry. Right, I think that's who wrote it. And I actually met Jimmy Perry once. We gave him an award for Dad's Army, right? And we went round to his office, and I've got a picture of me. I'll send it to you. A picture of me holding this Dad's Army board game that he signed for a mate of mine and stuff like that. I met him down in Covent Garden. He used to have an office down there. And you see, and you think, yeah, these are the guys that wrote, you know, Don't Tell Him, Pike, you know, Pike. Yeah. I mean, just like your mind just is, you know, you're sitting there with Roger Moore and it's like, what the hell am I doing? You know, I shouldn't be here. I'm not worthy kind of thing. And in a way, I feel that way most of the things I've done in telly or in film now, strangely enough.
I call that imposter syndrome. Is that called? Yeah.
Is it? I feel a bit of a fraud doing all these things. I think I sort of like, well, I just made some badges up and did this and stuck a sign on the wall and whatever. But I guess it's the atmosphere that I remember more than anything around those studios. And, you know, in comparison with any other TV studio, I've said this before, in Melbourne, Channel 10 was the only one where you could film that show the way it was filmed. You couldn't do that at ABC. You couldn't do it because we didn't have that backlot area. We didn't have a fence going around. You know, it was in a way. Sorry,
it's perfect for Prisoner. That building.
Perfect. You know. They were out of the woods. The people that worked at Channel 10, I think, felt a little bit like second-class telly people because Channel 9 was the big, glossy Channel 9. ABC was the big drama thing, you know, and all that stuff. And I think Channel 10 was like, we're stuck out in the middle of nowhere, Nunawading, right? And, you know, but we're plugging on. And I think that actually contributed to the way the show was made because it was all self-contained. And, you know, you'd go to Channel 10 and it didn't feel like you were going to a job. It felt like you were going to have some fun during the day, you know? And of course, that whole backlot area was then there was the Holiday Island swimming pool.
Lassiter's. And that's the thing about that location is, you know, you can drive to Nunawading, which I'm only 15 minutes away, but
all right,
you can go and look at Channel 10, but then you drive, you know, 2 minutes down Springvale Road and you can go to Pinot Court, which is Ramsay Street. And still the house.
Yeah, it is. It's all still there. I think they used to do, I remember when I was last in Australia many years ago, I was going up one of the motorways or freeways and a bus was in front of me, and it said Neighbours tour
Oh,
bus.
we're doing tours. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they used to do tours, and it was this mini bus, and I'm thinking, God Almighty, it's basically there's a studio and there's a street. It's like,
They were booked. I remember speaking to I don't think they're doing them now. I could be wrong, but back like 2007 and 8, I actually got to know someone from there. That they were booked out for months in advance. Like people
well,
coming.
yeah, a lot of people going to Australia, and I've met people here in Britain who are fans of Prisoner and say, "Oh yeah, I've been over to Australia twice." And I said, "Did you go to the studios?" "Oh, I stood outside." And I said, "You went all that way?" I said, bribe the guy on the gate, go up there on a Saturday afternoon or something. Tell them Jeff sent you or whatever.
Well, we have an event. We do an annual event every year in August. I get some cast together, 50 fans, and it's really laid back and great. And we've had some fans fly in from UK just for my little event with 6 cars.
Well, you should have a word with whoever the studio manager is, and say, look, you'd like to. So I don't know how busy the studios are now. I mean, Neighbours has just been cancelled, so maybe they.
So I don't know. It's sad to think what will happen with those studios now, but so I don't.
Well, yeah. I mean, the odd thing is, in the UK, we were worried for a while that a lot of the big studios might die, and then of course these big. The Harry Potter thing, the Bond films continued, Pinewood, etc., etc. And now we actually have a shortage of a lot of studios. Granada Studios in Manchester that used to make all sorts of stuff from Coronation Street, which they still do. They were going to knock that down about 6 or 7 years ago. They then suddenly realized, hey, we've got 2 television studios. If we update these, we've got another proper studio. And they've been going great guns.
Yeah.
Pinewood is busy all the time. They do TV and they do films. Shepperton, you name it. There's all these studios around. I mean, there's one up this neck of the woods. There's a studio where I think they filmed a couple of dramas, which is literally 1,500 yards away from where I'm sitting. Oh, so wow. It's like, yeah. So there are, huge. I mean, I've never worked there or anything, but I think they did a World War II drama for the BBC there. But this is the difference, and this is why things have changed. The day of having a television station with studios where you film dramas in is gone. Oh, no. Nowadays, TV stations are broadcasters, and they get a production company, maybe their own production company, to set the show up. They hire a studio. BBC used to have a run of about 6 studios. So if you were doing Dad's Army, you were filming, say, on Wednesday. The set would go in on Tuesday. They do the show. They do it in front of an audience. Then the next morning or that night, the set would be struck. And then, the next one would go in, Birds of a Feather or whatever it was, right? Or the news or something else. That doesn't happen anymore. What normally happens is you hire a studio facility. It's yours for 13 weeks. You put your set in, you light it, you leave it there, and you go in and you shoot once a week or twice a week or whatever, depending on what the show is. And that's how production is done now. And of course, in the days of Prisoner, you don't take an OB truck out to a location. There's no need. You go out there with the crew. You might shoot 2 cameras, small cameras, portable ones, lighting kit. You shoot it all on location. I mean, the people somewhat said to me, why do you need to build sets then? Why was there ever a need? Well, what location can you go to for a prison cell? Yeah. Well, you have to build that, But more than that, it was technical requirements. It was, you need to have an absolutely flat floor so that when the cameras move, they don't wobble, they don't make a noise. You've got to have soundproofing. You've got to have a lighting grid. You've got to have a control gallery for doing the switching. You've got to have sound boom mics hanging over so people can hear what they're saying. Then to go and shoot on a location was very difficult. And in fact, in Britain, they used to film a lot of locations just with film cameras. So you had none of these like electronic cables, or anything. You just filmed them on film cameras, which is why if you see an episode of Dad's Army, when they're in the studio, Mannering's lining up the troops, and then you see a shot of them outside, all the outside stuff is shot on film cameras, camera to camera. So the production thing has changed a lot. And sometimes when you see these shows in the context of what we can do today, they're a bit creaky in a few ways, and it's largely due to the technology that we employed at that time. So it's a big difference from where we do things today.
Amazing.
I mean, I put out news programs every day, and I'm involved in all of that, and I wonder how they did that 25 years ago.
I know.
Where Channel 7 the camera people on the news used to go out with the sound recorders, and they'd come back with a roll of film that would go through this complex bath, and 15 minutes later you get a piece of dried film, you roll it up, you put it on a steam bed, you cut it, join it all together, and that's what went out on air that night. Can you imagine how long that all takes? And after shots, they're underexposed or out of focus or whatever. And, it's incredible how things have changed. And I just wish in many respects that, I saw a show recently, I think it's called Departure. It's on Netflix, and it's got all the latest techniques with the worst dialogue and some perhaps questionable acting.
What was Departure about again?
It's about an investigations bureau that investigates plane crashes.
Oh,
and I mean, it's quite interesting, and I'm watching at the moment. I'm hoping it'll improve. But the thing is, even with all the technology we have now, what this comes down to is good performances and good scripts.
Good scripts,
right? If you haven't got that, doesn't matter whether it's shot in 4K. It won't make the show any better, So, and I think that even though we were slightly derogatory about the show when we were working on it. And I think that was bred from those people that worked their guts out on that show and were sick to death of, this, right, I'm up on Monday, I'm at 8 o'clock here, and then I'm here till 9 o'clock at night. And then that's the thing that breeds that kind of contempt.
I think the issue with a lot of shows now is they're trying to push agendas. There's some great movies and shows that are out at the moment, but some.
Well, you know what?
A narrative.
You know what? Every show ever made, in a way, has some sort of agenda, right? Now, for instance, give an example. There was a television show where there was the first, I think, gay kiss on British TV, right? Now, you could say, well, I think it was, God, man, what was it on? Might have even been EastEnders or something like that. And, when you make a show, I mean, I've produced some things. I've done some documentaries and things like that. When you produce a show, you have to make a decision about sort of what this show is about, right? So, people could say, oh, well, Prisoner, it was just about women in,
it was, sorry, 1974, the BBC drama Girl. There was...
right, that might be it.
First game.
Yeah, that might be it. Now, okay, so you break that thing, and the next time it happens, it's not so much of a big thing, and eventually it's just normal, right? Whether you're gay or straight or whatever. Now, of course, in Prisoner, there was a lot of storylines with Frankie where this is a lesbian character, and that was quite, for 1978, that was pushing the edge a little bit. Yeah. It really was. And I think that when whoever made this decision, and I assume it was the writer or the producer or whatever, when they made the decision on this show, you can just sit back and say, oh, it's just a show about women in prison and what they go through, and we'll have some fight scenes, and that's it, right? But that doesn't create a program. What that does is that creates, that fills in some screen time. But what they did with Prisoner and a lot of other shows is they gave motivation for those characters. They gave a reason for why they're in there. And it meant that I think a lot of people sitting at home would have never met anybody a female person that's been in prison. right? Watching that show, I think there were ways that some of the audience developed an empathy or an understanding for how some people can get themselves into that situation in real life.
Yeah.
And how they can be, they've murdered their husband, but there's mitigating circumstances because he beat them for 20 years, So, and I think they did a really good job of that because they didn't cheapen the show. I mean, sometimes, a helicopter crash or fire or something, it's that. But I really honestly think that looking back at the show, that there was a strong idea behind it, not just the fact these women were behind bars.
Yeah,
it was, why they were there. And I think that the public took that together. And I'm sure that probably changed many people's opinions about perhaps lesbian women or women that have been through some trauma in their life. And I think that brought that into people's homes in a way that probably hadn't really been done much before. Yeah. And this is the same with really important British dramas like Cathy Comes Home, very famous British drama from the 60s, showing poverty in London with a family that couldn't cope and was struggling. And these things are the things that make a difference. In Britain at the moment, we had this thing about the post office workers.
I saw that. The post office versus but Mr.
Yeah, and this happened in real life. So ITV created,
I can't
it's insane. It basically was local postmasters, because of some dodgy software, were being accused of stealing money from their post offices. And it's absolutely nonsense. These are little old ladies that run the local tea thing at the Lions Club, right? Not why would they steal 15 grand? I mean, it's ridiculous. So anyway, what happened is the government at the time, the post office were covering their asses here, left, right, and centre. And even though, BBC, ITV, Channel 5, we reported on what was going on. I think the BBC was one of the first out the trap to say there's something odd about this. And one of our investigative reporters said, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. And they brought this to the public eye. But what really brought it to the public eye, so that the government was then forced to step in, was that ITV made a drama about it. And I can't remember the lead actor in it, but he's a very well-known actor. He was in the Dad's Army film, the one that they remade a few years back. And he played the main character, who was this
You're
guy.
talking about the one that was just on TV recently? Or?
Yes. Well, it would have been recently in Australia. It was about 18 months ago here. But what that meant is that people sat and watched that and were incensed and wrote letters to the papers and said this and got on social media.
Oh, it's Toby Jones that played.
Toby Jones, that's it, who does a great show called The Detectorists. Right. Which if you like comedy, The Detectorists is one of the best. Okay. And it's got the guy that was the guy in The Office with Ricky Gervais, the skinny one that was always talking about the Territorial Army and Gareth. Yeah. He plays the other detectorist, and if you haven't seen it, I swear to anybody, it's completely prisoner unrelated, but watch The Detectorist. It's a certain type of humor which improves as it goes through. 3 series, and every one of them is a gem. But again, this post office drama went out. People saw it. It meant that it became part of people's kind of conversation every day with other people, and that's what forced it, and that's what forced the government to look into it. And then they worked out that all these people, I think it was like 100 or something of these people, some of them had been in prison, and 2 of them had died without having this resolved, right?
Watching that going, holy fuck, like what? Yeah. I didn't believe it for a bit. I just looked at it.
I know, it is unbelievable what they did. And when you look into it, I mean, we at the BBC, we looked at various aspects of this story. I think I cut one story about somebody local who had been affected by this. And, you see what goes up, but also I saw the rushes. And these people were so wronged. It was incredible. I mean, and it was so obvious. A blind budgie could see that this was wrong. These were little people living in little English villages who were the local kind of pillar of the community kind of thing, being accused of multiple times ripping off this software. And it was appalling. So what I'm saying is that in the context of something like Prisoner, every show, it actually works better if it does have an agenda, because you're trying to push something. And certainly Prisoner was pushing a few different things, right? Whether that's right or wrong, and maybe these days they're pushing some agendas which maybe don't fit in with people's views, I don't know. But that's not for me. That's the job of the producer and the writers and the actors to work that all out. But the fact is, any show you make which has a reaction from an audience is usually because they gain some insight out of that show. Yep. You know, they gain some understanding. And I think Prisoner really changed a lot of people's views on the type of people that get banged up inside, you know, and the reasons why they did, and so on. Yep. And I think that's a really good thing to have that. Yeah.
Sure. Jeff, I can't thank you enough. It's been unbelievable. I'm probably, it's 1 a.m. there now, so
yeah, I should be in bed. I stayed up late.
No, I really appreciate it. On behalf of myself and the fans, I really thank you for coming on and sharing all your memories of Prisoner and everything else. And you got an amazing career and working with the BBC. And I could talk to you probably for another few hours about.
Well, I'm sure we will. Maybe we'll catch up again sometime off recording. But look, I mean, for the fans, look, you know, a lot of people think, oh, these mad fans, you know, they're interested. Why is this, blah, blah. Having met some of the fans, particularly at an event in Birmingham, and other times I've met people, you know, roundabouts, it's really a thrill for me to be held in some sort of regard by somebody I've never met before, because I happen to have worked on something for a short while, right? That's something really important to them. Because the fact is, you know, in the world, if you have things that are important to you and you collect all the information about it, or you learn it, or you watch the episodes 10 times over, right? Yeah. Well, if that gives you enjoyment in life and it gives you a thrill and it makes your life more enhanced, then great. And if I've been a little tiny, weeny, infinitesimal part of that enjoyment, then that fills me with a lot of enjoyment. You know, I mean, there aren't many jobs out there where you get a job satisfaction, not only on the job, but years later.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you get that? So I'm very pleased to be here with you, Matt, and I hope that all the fans out there in Prisoner have gained a little bit of insight, and you know, maybe they'll book an appointment with Joy Westmore's husband, if he's still around, at the dentist down in Seaford. But no, I mean, look, all these things add up to something special. And as I say, pleasure meeting anybody who's a fan of Prisoner or any of the other things I worked on. I'm very thrilled to have that kind of interaction with those people. So thank you, Matt.
Amazing. Thank you, Jeff. And I'll let you get some sleep. And yeah. Anytime you want to come back on, I mean, non-Prisoner related, we can have a good chat about some stuff. So
well, I'm gonna make up my own special little badge. I might send you one of these, Matt, if you're really nice to me and you make me look a bit younger and a bit more lucid at this time of day. I might send you one of these.
Yeah, that'd be great. I love one.
I might. So we'll see what happens. I've only got about 8 of them left, I think. But look, no, absolute pleasure, Matt. Thank you for that, and keep up the good work with Talking Prisoner. I think you're doing a service to a lot of people, a lot of the fans, and also people like me that worked briefly on the show.
Really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, see you soon.
Okay. See ya. Bye.
I used to give her roses. I wish I could again, but that was on the outside, and things were different then. We'd build our world together, sharing all the love we'd known, till I had to face the nightmare of waking up alone. On the inside the sun still shines, and the rain falls down, but the sun and rain are prisoners too when morning comes around. Last night I dreamed we were together, sharing all the love we'd known, till I had to face the nightmare of waking up alone. On the inside the sun still shines and the rain falls down, but the sun and rain are prisoners too when morning comes around. On the inside the roses grow, they don't mind the stony ground, but the roses here are prisoners too when morning comes around. I used to give her roses, I wish I could again, but that was on the outside, and things were different